This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Everyone's a blooming critic, aren't they, these days? First text I've read this morning. Oh, come on, James, not another phoning about Nan's hip replacements. Let's get stuck into the politics, says Mark. Thank you. Blimey. Talk about knocking the stuffing out of a fella before he's even got up and running. No, I mean, this is dripping with politics. This is pure politics. This is possibly one of the biggest decisions taken by this government so far. And I had for the first time all week, I actually had a vague inkling what I was going to say for the first minute of the show before Mark ambushed me in such an obnoxious fashion. I was going to open with this. Wait, let's start again. Can we start again? Should we start again? Don't rewind live radio at this moment. Pretend that this is live. Well, it is, actually. So this is the real beginning of the show. I'm just going to stroke my chin to get into the mood. You ready? Are you ever surprised by your own ignorance? By which I mean, if I'd asked you a week ago if you understood something, or if you knew what something was about, you'd say, yeah. You wouldn't think about it too deeply. But yeah, of course I do. Are you ever ambushed, surprised by your own ignorance when you realise, to your own surprise, how little you know about something? I think it's probably quite a healthy impulse, right? It's quite a healthy. I mean, the opposite is to think that you know everything about everything. I have been surprised. I was surprised yesterday when Natasha came into the studio to share news of Keir Starmer's announcement that he was abolishing NHS England. I was very surprised and a little bit ashamed to find myself wondering what that meant. I can't open every show wondering whether there's a German word for the thing that I'm trying to describe to you. But there probably is a German word for this one at least. The realisation that you don't know anything like as much as you might have thought you knew about any given subject. So Natasha came in yesterday and talked about how Sir Keir Starmer had announced the abolition of NHS England. Sean in Consett immediately got very, very exercised because he had heard that Keir Starmer was abolishing the NHS. He sent me a very angry message with one of those capital lettered insistences that I read this out, saying, why don't they abolish the royal family instead? Why is he abolishing the NHS? But that's not what is being done. And then a slightly shamefaced realisation that I didn't really know what this meant. I didn't really know what this means. Was exacerbated this morning when everybody really joined forces. There was an almost unanimous celebration of the decision, despite the fact, and you know that I'm a massive softie, despite the fact that 9,500 people are set to lose their jobs, which would, if I was editing a national newspaper, which would encourage me to put a little bit of control on the exuberance being expressed, but I guess the mail is going to mail. Telegraph goes with Starmer scraps NHS England in £800 million gamble. The abolition of NHS England, Telegraph reckon could cost up to £800 million, but again, the news is greeted warmly elsewhere in the paper. The Mail, finally, patients to be put before NHS bureaucrats. NHS revolution, Streeting seizes control of £192 billion health service to force change. You'll have heard me challenge Natasha yesterday, coming up with a question that we could ask in the context of this news announcement, and she has. She came up with a cracker. She said, do you trust the government to run the NHS? But that, of course, veers a little bit too close for my comfort to questions that invite people with very strong opinions and no understanding or experience to ring in and share their views. I think you get enough of that on LBC without me joining in. So what I want to know is why you, or how you greet this news and why. 0345 6060 973 will be shortly the number that you need. But the idea that there were two management structures in place is something that's actually quite hard to get your head around, right? So this has been the status quo. This has been the normal since 2012 when Andrew Lansley was Health Secretary, promised repeatedly not to undertake any form of top-down transformation of the health service, and then undertook a top-down transformation of the health service. It gives you the space, I think, to make meaningful comparisons. It's not that long. It's only 13 years, so there'll be plenty of people listening who worked in the NHS before NHS England was set up and after NHS England was set up. You will perhaps be best placed to tell us what the major differences are, what the major differences may be. There is clearly a surfeit of bureaucracy in many areas of life. My pendulum theory, it's not my pendulum theory, but my the little trick I use to understand the world better comes in particularly helpful at times like this. You swing the pendulum for about 10 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon, everything is perfect, and then it starts moving a bit too far in the opposite direction as it ends the journey from when it had gone too far in the other direction. And that leads to the question, of course, of why, if it was so bad and so obviously something that needed to be undone, why the heck, well, I think I know the answer to this, and Mark will be pleased because it's politics. Why the heck has it not been done before? And the answer is because the Tories were in power and the Tories did it, and they may have recognised that it was probably not the thing that they should have done. I think I heard Jeremy Hunt welcoming this news quite warmly yesterday, but they couldn't have undone it because that would have involved admitting that they'd made a terrible mistake in the first place. And if memory serves, it was quite a controversial introduction anyway. I also want to challenge the idea that this is being universally welcomed. I mean, certainly if you're one of the 9,500 people facing imminent unemployment, you're unlikely to be cracking out the party poppers this morning. But you may also have arguments as to why you are worried, why you think this may be bad for everybody, and most obviously for the NHS. What I really want to know is what they think they're going to fix. What you as an NHS professional can point to today as evidence that something must be done, that dread phrase that is normally, of course, the territory of the strongly opinionated and ill-informed. Something must be done. Don't ask me what. Something must be done. But why do you feel that this surfeit of bureaucracy, this excess of bureaucracy, is something that needs to be urgently addressed? And crucially, what problems has it introduced into your life? How has it made your job harder? 11 minutes after 10 is the time. Christina's already kicking things off. As a former nurse and health policy expert, I agree with the abolition of NHS England to remove a layer of bureaucracy and all centralised control of, for example, IT procurement. Can you get that translated for me into ordinary Joe language, please? However, it's all very well under a Labour government, but what are the implications when Tory or Reform take power and want to get rid of the NHS entirely? I trust a Labour government to run the NHS, but what are the safeguards against future regimes? I think that applies every day to everything, doesn't it? The idea that you can't do much in this country because the other lot might get back in again. That's why Keir Starmer is probably right when he talks about the impossibility of rejoining the European Union anytime soon. I wish this wasn't true, and I hope you don't indulge in shoot the messenger type behaviours, but they won't let us back in until it is no longer a political hot potato. They will not. The European Union won't even begin to think about readmitting the United Kingdom, even if we had some sort of referendum and tried, until it is absolutely certain in the minds of everybody that the next government isn't going to come in and start trying to undo it all again. They just don't need the hassle. So Christina's point, applied in this case to the NHS, applies to many, many other areas of life, all of which, Mark will be delighted to hear, are politics. So that's it, really. I just want to know. I use the NHS a lot. I have used the NHS a lot in recent years, and I have had almost uniformly positive experiences. Latterly, mostly at West Middlesex Hospital, where we've been incredibly well looked after in often quite difficult circumstances. I can only share my own stories, but 7 stitches in my forehead last week would be the most recent, and seeing an A&E that is massively oversubscribed. I'm not getting an idea there of whether or not there's too much bureaucracy. It's a tabloid refrain of yore that there are too many managers in the NHS, but when you actually make the comparisons between the United Kingdom and other countries, it turns out we don't have a disproportionate number of managers, and yet there is a widespread perception that bureaucracy not only can but should be cut. So Alan Milburn is going to be involved again, one of Tony Blair's head honchos. Managers are going to be shown the door. Red tape is going to be cut. And I mean, if this is true and widespread, job duplication is going to be undone. I mean, how widespread is job duplication? It's something that you do encounter in the private sector, particularly if there's a takeover. You know, if Global buys another radio station, there'll be people on that radio station who've got a job that somebody in this building is already doing. But how has that happened in the NHS? How did NHS England contribute to that? 14 minutes after 10 is the time. So, fill your boots on this. How do you... listen, if you think as a patient you're qualified to answer this question, please don't feel excluded. I just... as a patient, think we're probably not. We probably don't know. I think this is where the ignorance that I owned up to at the beginning of this conversation came from. You've got an excuse because it's not your job to understand this stuff. I haven't really. I should know more about what NHS England is and how its introduction has affected the service that we receive in surgeries and hospitals, but I don't. Luckily, I've got you. I can ask you. In fact, I don't think I've met the subject yet where I can essentially address and fix my own ignorance by throwing open the phone lines. And that's what we're going to do now. So don't hold back. I think it's going to be largely confined to people who are or have worked in the health service. Ideally, people that can make comparisons with what it was like before 2012, but not necessarily, because you may have evidence of excessive bureaucracy. That's point 1, 0345 6060973. Job duplication. I'd love to come up with a absolutely stone cold example of that, especially if you're one of them. So I've got a job, James, and there's a bloke over the road who's got exactly the same job. Does that actually happen? It's almost Kafkaesque, isn't it, to use a horribly overused adjective. 0345 6060973. And there's probably a third question there as well, but it's currently eluding me. So we'll just start with that. Well, yeah, of course. Genuinely, how do you greet this news? I suspect if you're going to ring me to tell me that it's a good thing or a bad thing, you're going to be able to answer the other questions as well. But they are abolishing NHS England. It is a very big deal, trademark, and brackets, somewhat embarrassingly, close brackets. I'm not quite sure why, but you are, and you're about to tell me. It's 10:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is London-centric, you're absolutely right, but or England-centric at least, but some days that can't be helped. And another reason why you might have the hump if you are in Scotland this morning, articulated perfectly by Alan. James, do you have any idea how galling it is to be Scottish and be told in an offhand fashion that we can forget about rejoining the EU until the English change their minds? I don't think it was offhand. I certainly didn't mean it to be offhand, but yeah, of course. It's hugely galling. It's pretty galling being English and being told that we can't rejoin the European Union until the idiots realise what an idiotic thing it was to do in the first place. And it ceases to be a politically live issue, Alan. So I don't think you get a particularly special Scottish-shaped dispensation on this. It's incredibly galling for everybody with a brain to still be hostage to a decision taken by people who turned theirs off for the duration of a referendum. But on we go. What I want is the story. I may even rank you today. I may even start a sort of chart. The story that best illustrates the sclerotic, excessively bureaucratic, job-duplicating absurdities of the way the NHS is currently run in the context of NHS England. So the story about something that's happened at work. I remember the first time someone told me with a straight face that it cost £18 to change a bulb in a corridor at the hospital where they work because it was all done. I don't think this is an NHS England story, but I want those kind of stories. The tale you can tell that helps the rest of us understand immediately that this is actually an area that is in need of urgent improvement. It may not be this improvement, they may not get it right, but the thing that proves, to use that dread phrase of pub bores through the ages, something must be done. 20 minutes after 10. Hugh is in South Normanton in Derbyshire. Hugh, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. First time caller.
Welcome.
And as a Chesterfield fan, I've just about forgiven you, Kidderminster Harriers, for inflicting our only home defeat last year.
Yeah, well, that was last season. I mean, it's a different story. Anyway, on we go.
Yeah, anyway. Now, I worked in NHS corporate governance from 2003 to 2017 when I retired.
Oh, perfect.
So I saw the birth of NHS England through Andrew Lansley's reforms. And my general view of the NHS England was that it was an impediment to progress.
Yeah.
It was intended on the first surface to be independent of government and the independent body that ran the NHS, but in reality, the politicians have never relinquished control of the NHS. So there are lots of times when NHS England either couldn't do stuff because they were getting contrary instructions from ministers. I mean, one of the bizarre things was at the time, it was meant to be that ministers would give NHS England the plan, the budgets and everything. And you'd often sit there thinking, so what's the Department of Health doing?
Right.
And when you were talking just before we came on about job duplication, oh boy, did that happen.
Go on, tell me more.
Well, for a while, I worked for the Derbyshire Primary Care Trust, which was the commissioning organisation for the whole of Derbyshire. So we had a board, a finance team, an HR team, risk teams, and all that kind of stuff. But then they decided to set up the CCGs, and I think we had 4 or 5 of them in Derbyshire, each of which had a board, each of which had a finance function.
All of whom are getting paid.
All of whom are getting paid, and so it's this tension between localism and national direction. But in creating local structures, they, in some cases, quadrupled or more the numbers of teams doing the same thing.
So this is the crux of it, isn't it? This is exactly where we need to be and where I need your help. You need to get your torch out. So clinical commissioning groups responsible for planning and commissioning healthcare services, but NHS trusts were responsible for that as well. So is it a form of devolution? Are they constantly?
Well, I need to clarify something. Not NHS trusts, primary care trusts.
Primary care trusts.
Yeah, NHS trusts and foundation trusts dealt with the provider side of things.
I'm already lost. Do you know, I mean, 2 things have happened at the first call to the programme. I'm less embarrassed about the ignorance that I owned up to at the beginning, because this is really complicated, and if you're not doing it for a living, you're not going to be... I'm also drowning in acronyms. That's the other thing.
Absolutely.
Look at the way you say absolutely, tossing your CCGs around the place like everybody knows what you're talking about. Honestly.
CCGs, my NHS Trust, my PCTs.
PCPs, PCTs, MFIs, at NHSs. So, just for my ease of understanding, and hopefully everybody else's, the Primary Care Trust is in charge of the same things that the clinical commissioning groups are in charge of, but on a grander scale. But the clinical commissioning group was
the CCGs replaced the PCTs,
right? And they're part of NHS England.
The idea is that they report directly to NHS England. Yeah.
And the original plan, which is, I suppose, understandable, was to remove NHS policy making almost from politicians, so that it wouldn't be done for partisan or ideological reasons. It would become more efficient, and it didn't work, because if it had worked, they'd have shut the Department of Health.
Yeah, and the brutal truth is, because the NHS is directly funded from taxation, which is obviously set through the budget, the Chancellor and the politicians never relinquished control. They would set the annual plan, they would set the annual strategic plan and saying, these are the areas that we need you guys to concentrate on, and here's the funds for doing it. So there was still a very strong central steer, and quite often my experience was that NHS England, the people working for him, was trying very hard to do the job they were actually asked to do.
Right.
But there was a blockage further up the system. So, I mean,
what was the blockage usually?
If I'm being honest, it was about protecting the PR of ministers.
Right. Well, so then this is not necessarily good news then, because it's going back in the other direction, back towards politicians being in control, which means that they're going to be even more sensitive to decisions that may be electorally unpopular. We also need to stress, as I'm sure you know, that the CCGs don't exist anymore either.
Well, that may be news on me.
You missed that. Since when did you retire? 2017.
Yeah.
So even you don't know that they were replaced by integrated care systems, or ICSs.
Oh God, no, I didn't know that.
Or ICBs, mate. It's the Health and Care Act 2022. I'll see your CCGs and I'll raise you an ICB and an ICS. The only thing that's missing is IBS, which is probably just as well. So
well, I got that from working in the NHS as well.
I bet you did. I bet you did. And
I mean, the thing about
former leader of the Tory party. Go on.
There are some unpleasant aspects at the idea of politicians being directly in control of the NHS because, as you say, they can make NHS decision-making very much reflect political priorities. But I think, to a certain extent, there's at least a degree of honesty about this.
Yes.
Because we know that the politicians are in control. They're in charge. They're directing the policy of the NHS.
The buck stops.
So that we... And the book, well,
sort of.
I've got an interesting story about when David Cameron was Prime Minister, if we've got time.
Yeah, go on then, fill your boots.
Because when I was working in the PCT, one of the things I had to deal with were the requests from people for what we called extra contractual treatments, like new and trial cancer treatments and things like that. And PCTs were having to make decisions based on health outcomes for the whole of their population. So sometimes PCTs wouldn't fund these new treatments that weren't clinically proven.
Because they were only going to be of benefit to a tiny number. So it's a form of utilitarianism that you're describing.
So if you had £100,000 to spend, you spend it on one cancer treatment or on 10,000 hip operations.
Got it, yeah. Okay.
It was that kind of decision. So, of course, MPs started getting their mailbags full of people that were being turned down the PCT. So David Cameron, in his infinite wisdom, decided they were going to take the decision for cancer treatments away from PCTs and establish a national fund where all these decisions will be made nationally through this national fund.
Yeah.
And I think within 2 years, they passed it back to the PCTs because they realised they didn't have enough money to meet all the requests they were getting. So that was very much about manipulating the PR agenda because they could, at one point they could say, these PCTs are nasty, horrible people, they're denying people cancer treatments, we can do better at that. But they suddenly found in the reality of it was that the demand far outstripped the resources that were available. And so they passed it back again. So the politicians at some point will change this because they will get heat. They will start to realise that the demands that people are making is not going to be met.
This is interesting. A bit like the OBR then. So it removes a firewall. It deprives politicians of the ability to say, well, it's not my fault. NHS England is independent. This is so in some ways it's courageous politics by Keir Starmer.
Yes, I mean, I suppose I'm looking at this thinking I can see lots of red flags, politicians being directly in charge. But for me, the big thing about this is I do think it restores a bit of honesty to the system because at least we now know who is making the decisions, who is steering this, and who to blame if it goes wrong. Yet they've removed the firewall, which, as you say, is courageous, which is why at some point it'll come back in. Because, I mean, I was actually working in the NHS. I actually started working in NHS in 1977, and I can't tell you the number of reorganisations I've seen in that time. And they've always been
I'm getting an idea of that now, aren't I? I mean, the CCGs and the PCTs and the IBSs. It's absolutely bonkers. But so your course...
One minute they want national control, then they realise that's too much effort, so then they push it back down to local on the idea that... And this is where this postcode lottery thing comes in. I mean, people call it postcode lottery. I don't. I call it local commissioning, where each area makes its own decisions on its own policy.
I'm going to run out of time. I sense you're not going to stop talking, are you?
Well, I was going to say, have we got a week to talk about?
Well, I mean, it's a bit pot kettle for me to point out that somebody else is letting their tongue run away with them, but it is actually 10:30. And the BMA, which proves that we have got some idea, well, you know what you're talking about, but I actually made some helpful contributions to that conversation, much to my own surprise, because the BMA have said that this is a, quotes, high-stakes move from government without NHS England acting as a buffer, I said firewall, between himself and delivery of healthcare to patients. The buck will now well and truly stop with the Health Secretary.
Yep.
So there it is. Completely. So we will find out. And I'll read you this quickly from Darren. Brilliant first caller, says Darren. But, take that with a pinch of salt. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. I've got a rather good missed information for you, which we shall do after talking to Sue. But there is also room for you to join this conversation. That how you know that NHS England was a disaster or just that it failed. The thing that happened at work that the rest of us will struggle to believe. I tried to do this and I couldn't do that, or I found out that there was someone over the road doing exactly the same. Just that sclerotic, excessive bureaucracy, red tape, job duplication. I want more. I want more. I want more. 10:33 is the time. Sue's in Reading. Sue, what can you tell us?
I'm probably not going to answer your question, but I'm going to have a go. I'm a practicing nurse. I've been in the NHS for, since God was a boy.
Yes.
And I've been through so many reorganisations. And
how many?
Like yourself,
go on, have a guess. How many?
I've lost count. Probably about, I don't know.
I can't believe the last fella worked in corporate governance. You heard him, and even he didn't know about the latest reorganisation because it happened after he retired.
There you go. Well, that was part of the problem.
Yes.
Is that, firstly, I'm delighted. Not delighted for the people that have lost jobs, but I'm delighted that the duplication and the swathe of management has left. As I described to your producer, I believe, NHS England was almost like a malignancy. It was quite small, but then over the years it's got bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point where it was, I don't know what you do. What do you function as? Who are you?
Who are you?
Who are you? I get loads of emails from people, and I don't know what their job description is, but they're telling me to do things, and it's like, well, firstly, can you tell me who you are, yes, what your role is in this, in this organisation,
yes,
and why you want me to do what you want me to do? But they don't seem to be able to answer those questions.
Ingrid is listening. She's also a nurse. She says layers and layers and layers of managers. I've been in the NHS for 28 years.
Yeah.
What were the good old days from your point of view?
The good old days was when the management and we knew who managed us.
Yes.
We could talk to those people that managed us. I would have walked over hot coals for my manager.
Really?
Years and years ago.
How many years ago, roughly? When did the rot set in? The rot set in probably about 15 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So before the introduction of NHS England then,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. But that just made it worse.
Yes.
It was another dimension that we had to deal with. But certainly when I started, I would have weekly meetings with the management, with my manager, and I noticed, because I'm a fairly senior nurse, but now today there are 8 layers of management above me, plus
8.
the collateral, and I'm only a small community
8.
trust. 8.
I feel like a parrot. Pieces of 8? Pieces of 8 layers of management?
Pieces of 8. And plus the collateral management. And it's
know
like,
what that means.
The people that are on this management create management. So for every reorganisation we've had, we've got the same managers with a different skirt on who employ more managers to help them out with the reorganisation.
And what do they do? I don't want to be lazy or indeed stereotyping, but if you've got 8 layers of managers, then as you've said, one layer is managing another layer, and by the time it reaches you, I presume you've had a form of Chinese whispers, have you? Or as you say, you've got no idea who this person is or why they're telling you what to do.
Exactly, and that's what happens. All the time. And the previous government, the Tory government, which was saying, we put in, I'm just making this up now, £290 billion.
Don't worry, so did they. Boris Johnson's 40 hospitals. You can say what you want, really, can't you, in this context? But I know what you mean. They kept saying that they were making more investment than ever before. Put money in,
which is fine. They probably did. But the problem was it didn't go to where it was supposed to go, which was to patient-facing clinicians. That's where we need the money, for the patients, not to feed.
No, I get it, and this is what they're saying. And so far, apart from scepticism about the ability of any human beings to deliver something, any politicians to deliver something, in terms of the aim, the expressed aims, everybody's welcome it. Even the Daily Mail uses the phrase layers of bureaucracy without any clear lines of accountability, which is exactly what you're describing. And you haven't given me a humdinger of a story, and that's fine. I may not get any. They may not exist. It's not like the 18 quid to change a light bulb in a corridor. It may be that things are too complicated to boil down into a James O'Brien friendly anecdote. But if you were being really generous, how did this happen, do you think? How do you think it happened? So we're not going to impute malign motivations on people. All of the people in those 8 layers of management are nice. It's not their fault that their jobs exist. How did it happen? How did things get so bonkers?
I think it just got so bonkers because the NHS as an organisation, I believe, has got so big.
Yeah.
We almost need to throw the cards up in the air and start again, because with every organisation, well, the organisation I know,
Yes.
there's just layer upon layer upon layer, and it just gets added to every single year or reorganisation or whatever we go through. These layers are added continually to the point, like you say, where my superior manager is so distant from me now, I don't even know who they are.
And if I don't suppose anyone would defend that, would they? So even if you could get them in the room and say, how can this be a good thing? They'd say, oh, I can't answer that question. You'll have to ask my manager.
Yeah, probably. And it's like yesterday, I was telling your producer, we had a meeting. I don't know, it was just a team meeting. Yeah. But we were told by our direct manager, they are looking at you. Well, who are they? What's they? And what exactly are they looking at? Because as clinicians, we are stretched to the nth degree.
Yeah, we know.
Whereas those keyboard warriors who live above us, who basically send out these little diktats and edicts to everybody, what do they actually do? What are they looking at? Can you tell? Nobody could tell.
And even if they could, what we're learning today is that there's quite possibly 5 others of them all doing the same thing when we only needed one. But again, we haven't quite got the we got the theory and we've got the suspicion, and you've got some of the proof. But I suppose what we need is someone to ring in and say, I don't know what my job is, James. I don't know why I've got that. It's just ridiculous. It's John over the road does exactly the same thing I do, and there's not enough work for either of us. I don't know, but I wish you well. When will we know if it's working, do you think, Sue? Will you still be in there? Will you still be in the job?
Do you know what? I'm looking to retire probably in the next year, and
outrageous.
Maybe I will be here.
Snowflake. Honestly, this is pathetic.
It really is. And you know what? Labour, I do think that's why I'm always quite suspicious of them, but I do, and it might be unfounded, and I might be back on in 6 months to say I completely cocked up here. But at this moment in time, I really believe in Wes Streeting.
Gosh, yeah, fair enough. I'm hearing good things. I mean, he upsets a lot of people as well, but that's the point about politicians that actually do things, I suppose. Wes Streeting and Peter Kyle, for the record, are the ones that I see the warmest praise for, and in Wes's case, also some of the most vituperative criticism. Ella's been in touch to say the nurse that's on now is spot on 100%, but you know how I work, you know my addiction to the shallow end. I want the story. The story that proves or illustrates, or the manager who doesn't know what their job is. You are living, walking, keyboard warrioring proof of every single thing that Sue has just said, because you've got a good job, well paid, got a nice job description. You've got no idea what you're supposed to be doing. I just remember my friend who did some temping, and she'd exaggerated. I've told you this story before, but funnily enough, it was in a hospital. She'd exaggerated some of her skills slightly on her CV. I forget what the details were. We're going back 20 years or more. And so she turned up as a temp agency worker at a hospital doing some form of elevated data entry. It was more than data entry, but she'd obviously ticked a box saying that she was familiar with a certain software package. So, and she wasn't. She had absolutely no idea what was going on. So they showed her what to do, showed her where she was sitting, sat her down, told her where the canteen was. So she said she's just off to get a cup of tea, and she never came back. She ran out the front door. So that kind of shallow but amusing story that would highlight exactly what it is that Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer are tackling here. Sue, take care. Claire's in Greenwich. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi. I think NHS England, the additional layers of bureaucracy creates a lot of patient risk.
Yes.
So I gave an example to the producer. We had a child in our emergency department for 6 weeks. This is not uncommon.
Right.
There are a lot of children that are sort of have additional needs such as autism,
yes,
or they have mental health conditions, or they're looked after children, so neglected during childhood, and then end up as adolescents with lots of complicating factors. But we had a young person in our department for 6 weeks. We were having daily meetings in excess of 40 people per meeting. We probably only needed 3, many of them from NHS England, getting paid a lot of money to sit and listen, but actually contribute nothing.
Well, we're very close now to the story that I'm looking for. 40 people in a room.
Yes.
All most of them must have known they didn't need to be there, mustn't they, in their heart of hearts? Or not?
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm even sitting there. So I'm from the hospital. So I'm a practitioner. I'm a manager in the hospital. And even I look at how many of us are in the meeting from the hospital. There's like maybe 8 of us. Probably don't need to be there.
Why? How did this happen, do you think? It didn't used to be like this. How do you think this happened?
It happens because, unfortunately, I do think the ICB is a big mistake,
yes.
I would say. The ICS is, for example, my role, there's a child in our hospital. I have to let someone else know about this child. So I'll let...
So you're in safeguarding, are you, Claire? Is that...
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I will let the ICB know.
Yeah.
The ICB will let someone else know. And then we all sit in a meeting and we discuss this child. And actually what we don't have is we have a lack of placements.
Right.
We have a lack of social care funding. So actually if we de-stripped a lot of this out and put more money into investment for child and adolescent mental health services, if we put some more money into, foster placements for children, local authority accommodation for young people that have had a lot of trauma, we wouldn't be there. We sat there for 6 weeks, daily meetings. This is, one of many children. And we sat there and we kept having the same conversations, and NHS England would come in and go, well, I don't agree with that. And they go, I'm not happy with this one part of something.
Right, because they're justifying their own existence.
Yes, absolutely. And then you sit in the same meeting. And I would say, sometimes I even question my own role. I do question my own role because I think actually if you don't,
So do I. That's how I opened the show this morning. Am I too ignorant to conduct this phone-in? Happily, I can throw open the floor to you. But you should be. But if you're in management rather than patient-facing, as you are, you don't have that. What was the word I want? That sort of hands-on justification for your existence. So what you're thinking is, do I need to be in this meeting? You're not thinking, does my job actually need to exist?
Yes.
You know that your job needs to exist. You just wonder whether some of the stuff that you're compelled to do is actually necessary, especially when there's 7 or 8 other people from your own hospital in the same meeting, essentially representing the same position.
Yes. And then obviously with NHS England, with this particular child, he could have gone within a week, but it was all about, this part. So this is a child that's out of one area, placed in another area. Who's going to take responsibility? Who's going to pay for it? And NHS England sit above all of that. And
I get it. But then, of course, if something does go wrong,
yes,
the newspapers come for people, sometimes by name. I mean, not the foot soldiers, but they'll come for the sort of head of social services, or they'll come for and that makes them overly cautious as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
and one of the other things that I just think is really important to point out, which no one actually thinks about, is a lot of these roles across providers, across ICBs, ICSs, everything. There's a lot of London waiting, and it's something I was talking to a colleague about yesterday. And a lot of them work from home. So, for example, I know a whole team of about 50 staff members that work in an NHS community organisation.
Right.
They all work from home. And they all get London waiting. Majority of them don't work in London.
Okay.
Don't live in London, sorry. So they get their sort of £6,000, £7,000
well, that's just
extra.
daft, isn't it? I mean, that is just daft. No one's going. I mean, there's no political justification for getting London waiting if you're not actually working in London. Yeah,
so they should give them the option. You either give up the London waiting, or I get London waiting, as I said. As you know,
well, you work in London. So is that That's a post-lockdown phenomenon, is it? Yeah,
and
so
actually,
but again, it's something that you'd have thought with all these bloody managers, someone would have spotted that a little bit sooner and put the kibosh on it, wouldn't you? Well, they benefit. A lot of the managers that are working from home are the ones that are getting the money as well. So, Okay, well, we will watch. So this is. I said at the outset, I can't remember the last time a policy announcement was so immediately popular. There is, of course, now a lot of room for wondering whether it will prove to do any of the things that people are hoping to do, but I haven't got a single dissenting voice at the minute. 0345 6060 973. Just on that simple question of whether abolishing NHS England is the right thing to do. And then you're left again with that question of why the hell hasn't this happened sooner? To which the answer is, well, Conservatives.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51. Do you want to hear a little bit of Wes Streeting talking to Andrew Marr on LBC last night? What? You don't? Well, tough.
I think the jobs will inevitably change. I think the other thing to say, though, in terms of future projections, we've got an NHS where sort of 1 in 9 people in the country are projected to be working for it. If we carried on at the rate of growth in staff numbers for the next 50 years, 100% of the country would be working for the NHS.
I mean, that's a fairly silly thing to say, Wesley, isn't it, really? Does everyone else think of the Princess Bride when I say Wesley? I don't even know if his name is Wesley. It is now. I mean, graphs are not infinite, are they? There's no way that we're going to, even if we carried on the current trajectory, there's no way 100% of the country is ever going to be working for the NHS. How do I know that? Because I won't. I refuse. I'm going to stay here. Imagine how rubbish your life would be if you didn't get to spend 3 hours with me anymore every day. You'd be destroyed. Oh, all right, 50 years. Yeah, I mean, I'm planning on making 100. I think I'd probably still be there as long as I stop falling off my bike. 10:52 is the time, so that is why it needs to be done. I'm getting a clearer picture. Are you? Is this helping? I'm getting clear. I'm getting closer. I feel that the picture is coming into focus. What we'll never get an answer to, and I appreciate it's a bit lazy of me just to say the word Conservatives, and then Keith presses the button and it sounds like someone's cracking a whip, which is oddly appropriate, I suppose, in many ways. But the idea that it is just because they couldn't really own their own mistake back in 2012, so it's taken until 2025 before anyone can come in and do it. But what doesn't happen very often is an absence of criticism, a genuine absence of criticism, even on my inbox. Even Idiot's Corner is empty so far today. Nobody has got anything to say that challenges the idea that in the moment of abolition, the decision to get rid of this and bring control of the NHS back into the orbit of politicians is a good thing. It's crazy, right? Chris is in Southampton. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. Lovely chat again. Second call. I've worked for the National Health Service as a nurse for 45 years. I handed my registration in this summer after my service. And all of I agree that the NHS England has got to go. It's a waste of money. It's a level of bureaucracy that's not needed. The big problem with the NHS, in my opinion, started in 1983 when I was still a student nurse.
Griffiths
when the Griffiths report came out.
In 83. Yes, I remember from my A-level.
And that was a situation where suddenly clinical sisters on a ward suddenly had to take on major management roles. And I knew lots of sisters who retired early because they didn't want to learn about budget spreads and all of that. They wanted to be nurses. Pre-1983, we had a hospital administrator that administered the hospital. We had a director of medicine who was in charge of the doctors, and we had a matron. And in that situation, we knew who our line managers were. We knew who the boss was. We respected them. We reported to them. It's all changed with these levels.
He worked for Sainsbury's. He worked for Sainsbury's, didn't he, Griffiths?
He did indeed, yes. He was a chief exec.
He came in and felt that people like the ones you described would want to have more say in how things were run, whereas that might have been a category error.
It was.
Because you didn't. You wanted to have more time to do what you became a nurse to do.
Yes, and the problem that we encountered in 1983, 84, 85 was that we suddenly had a loss of all of these people with clinical experiences managing wards that were expected to do the management that you would expect a budget and accountant to do, and they didn't like it. I would go back to that day any time where we knew who our line manager was. And coming back to the NHS England, it is a level of bureaucracy that, to be honest, I feel sorry for the people losing their jobs, but they will be reabsorbed, some of them, into the NHS to deliver care. But I believe we will not remember them in 3 or 4 years' time as being an organisation. They are not required, and the responsibility of the NHS will fall on the politicians who we elect to manage it, to direct it and strategically plan it.
Well, you're brilliant. And it's a funny one, because not to defend Griffiths, but Roy, I think. It was Roy Griffiths.
Roy Griffiths,
yeah,
that's correct.
I got an A in my A-level. It was a miracle, really. Thank you, Chris. I can see why he would think that somebody like you should have a bigger say in how things are being run, because you really know the ins and outs of it and you know what's what. And it would, from an outsider point of view, from a private sector point of view, from someone who's in the business of running supermarkets, it would actually make quite a lot of sense. But to me, completely overlooks the vocational and unique nature of healthcare.
Exactly. And we were pulled away from that. One of my sisters, who I worked with in 1983 when I was a student,
yes,
she actually took early retirement and went to become a florist. She found it happier to do that type of job than to take on the full budget.
Because I don't want to do this. I want to look after patients. And it's quite high stress work. It's quite high powered work. But for somebody, I don't know. I don't want to malign Roy Griffiths entirely, but you brought it up. But that moment of pivot, perhaps, is precisely the one that Chris has identified, when people just sort of thought that we need more management, and the question of why never actually got asked. I don't know. I'm allergic to simplistic answers to complicated questions, but I suppose even a stop clock is right twice a day. Kathy says, this caller is spot on. In so many fields, your only option for promotion is to move into management, and most of us don't actually want to be managers. And I got another one from somebody working in I'm going to forget what it is now, an ICB? Yeah, I think it's an ICB, saying that all the highly paid people around him are ex-clinicians who wanted to see out their careers, the final few years of their career, in a relatively easy job with relatively high pay. Now, look, he's generalising. Rather, he's not generalising. He's describing his day-to-day experience. It may not be yours, but certainly the more we talk about this, the more flab there seems to be. Chris, thank you. Arjun is in Luton. Arjun, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm a neonatologist, so I'm a clinician, and we look after children who are just born. Yes. And my experience is about a special equipment that we wanted to buy in order to reduce the time of their jaundice, which in principle everybody agreed, because it was a great piece of equipment and nobody was, obstructive. But the process of getting it was so laborious that we were told the trust can't buy it. We went to ICB. ICB said it's a specialized commissioner, so therefore it has to come from NHS England. It took more than a year to get the machine ordered.
This is it. If you build it, they will come. This is the story, Arjun. This is the one that I wanted. So you're trying to get a machine to cure babies of jaundice, and you keep getting sent from one room to another.
To the merit that it's a beautiful piece of equipment. However, when it got ordered from Germany, by the time we placed the order, that model wasn't working anymore. So we got alternative model, which is twice the price, local price. God. And then ultimately, here comes the punch. The machines have been ordered. They have been lying in an open corridor, obstructing people. Yes. Because the plugs that they use in Germany, no surprise, doesn't work.
It's got a two-pin plug. It's got a two-pin plug on it.
Absolutely. Now that also has to be approved by somebody higher up to either come, or even we can't use an adapter because of health and safety issue. So I've been told it's 35,000 pounds worth of machines lying in an open corridor, because there are layers and layers and layers
of management, all signing off on it, all saying I can't do this. Computer says no. This isn't my job. This is his job. And you got and of course, I mean, you tell the story beautifully, but the frustration must be pretty 100%.
As a clinician, or even for the families of the babies who could immensely benefit of.
And I presume it's health and safety, and I'm not maligning health and safety on this occasion, because I can change a plug, Arjun, and I struggle to dress myself some mornings. So I mean, it wouldn't be hard to do it, but you need to get somebody in properly qualified to do it.
That's correct. Yeah.
I'm going to give you. Do you listen to the show a lot, or are you just accidentally tuned in for the first time today?
No, I do very often.
I'm going to give you a Ray Liotta, which is the honour that I reserve for people who bring exactly what I'm looking for to the programme. So you don't have unique qualifications, but my goodness me, we got there in the end.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it, they will come.
We built it, and Arjun came. Have a great day. And also, you gloss over what you do, Arjun, at the beginning. A neonatologist. I mean, thank you for that.
Thank you for your listening.
Thank you for the work that you do. It's quite important, isn't it? It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we move on now into slightly different, very different territory, where I want you to tell me about how you have been affected by a subject that we've talked about a lot. It's been a mad week. You know, it was only on Monday that we did Online Safety Day on this radio station and dedicated almost all of our programming to a single subject, various different angles on that single subject. But there it is. The idea that it just feels to me like it was weeks ago. I guess that's partly because of the broader news agenda. But one thing it brought home to me is the danger of thinking that because a challenge is so huge, there's no point undertaking it at all. There are two elements to this, two elements I took away from Monday's programmes, not just mine, but other people's as well. The first is that we are going to have to bring the social media operators into line. And that's a terrifying political prospect because they are so powerful. And the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House has bolstered their power to, I would argue, sort of medieval feudalist type levels. Not just Musk, who is the most obvious beneficiary of Donald Trump's presidency so far, but all of the others as well. They were all there, except, I guess, Bill Gates, actually. Was the guy from Apple there? Was Tim Cook there? I can't remember. But the rest of them are just queuing up to do his bidding and, of course, to guide his hand. And the area about which I think, and forgive me, I don't know this, but I think the area of which they are most terrified is online regulation. Not so much the Amazon guy, I don't imagine, but certainly the owners of social media platforms, so Zuckerberg and Musk, are absolutely terrified of being held responsible for what happens on their social media platforms. It's mad, really, that we've even allowed this confusion to take root, the idea that I'm not a publisher, I'm just a platform. If you come on this show and say something libelous, we get sued. If you come on this show and break Ofcom rules, I get into trouble. The ruling doesn't go up saying John in Ongar or Doris in Shepherd's Bush or Bert in Doncaster have fallen foul of an Ofcom ruling. The report comes out saying James O'Brien's show has fallen foul of an Ofcom ruling, and Daily Mail will be all over it like a cheap suit. So the idea that you can go on Facebook and encourage people to set fire to a hotel full of refugees, or you can go on Twitter and libel people or publish fake videos of things that have never happened, but the technology is such now that you won't be able to tell. And the truth, of course, has not even got its trousers on before the lie is halfway around the world. Tim Cook was there, I think. So yeah, it's probably just Bill Gates then, really. So this is the thing that makes, for me, half of the issue. It's going to have to happen. We cannot go on like this. Whether it can happen when Donald Trump is in the White House, whether the United Kingdom can do it without being part of the European Union, whether or not the political will is yet big enough. I think it is. Mine is. It wasn't until Monday. It was one of those magical moments of radio where even as the presenter, my mind changed, and I was already on the right side of history when it comes to this sort of stuff. Absolutely clear since the Farage riots in the summer that these platform owners should not be able to get away with hosting a site upon which a content can be posted by someone who ends up in jail, but the bloke who owns the platform waltzes off scot-free. It cannot go on like this because, you know, what's next? Where does it end? So the necessity of online regulation, and you can see that they're lying about it because they keep talking about free speech, claiming that it's somehow under threat in this country. You won't believe me when I tell you what is happening in the United States in the arena of free speech, particularly at Columbia University. I'm almost reluctant to tell you because the words, particularly the words said by the Dean of the Journalism School, are absolutely chilling. I'll tell you shortly. Don't let me forget. Remind me. It's J.D. Vance spouting utter bilge about family planning clinics in Scotland and telling complete lies about free speech in this country being somehow compromised. They've now locked up a naturalised American citizen, a guy with a green card who used to work for the UK government in Syria. They've now locked him up and they're planning to deport him. He's got an American wife for the crime of having protested in solidarity with the Palestinian people at Columbia University last year. If you think free speech is under threat, then you need to be having a look at the other side of the Atlantic. And that's why they're doing it. They are marshalling, and you know I'm a great believer in the contempt for the con men, compassion for the con, but sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. They are marshalling the forces of people, the very online right, who already believe all sorts of nonsense about everything from vaccines through to great replacement theory, which Elon Musk has been buying into this week. They are marshalling the radicalized online right, the excessively online far right, to resist attempts to properly regulate these platforms. They want to be free to continue to tell their racist lies. They want to be free to continue to post fake footage, deep fake footage, portraying the people they don't like in horrific circumstances, some of them pornographic. They want to be free to lie. And what people like Musk and Vance are doing is arguing furiously that an attempt to stop people lying or inciting violence or committing crimes online, I'll say that again, an attempt to stop people committing crimes online is somehow an infringement of freedom of speech. So if, like me, you wonder what on earth Farage is wanging on about when he stands up at a conference where Elon Musk has just finished giving Nazi salutes, if you wonder what on earth he's wanging on about when he says he can't say things in this country without getting arrested, and then, of course, within the same breath, he's referring a colleague to the police for saying things, for hurty words, that's what they're doing. They're doing the bidding of these people. They are currying favour with Elon Musk and, to a lesser extent, Donald Trump, because I don't think he cares one way or the other. He's just going to be acting out of narcissistic self-interest. So that's why you need to watch this. That's point one, which I'm not actually intending to talk about much this hour, but now that I've opened the door, I think perhaps we should. And then point two, the other thing that I used to think was too big a challenge to undertake, too high a mountain to climb, is the absolute necessity of, if we can't get the phones out of the hands of the current generation of teenagers, we absolutely have to work to make sure they don't get into the hands of the next generation. And I think, if you'll indulge me for just one moment, I think the reason why I struggled with that was because of the history of moral panics in this country. You know, as someone who really likes video games, for example, I found it ridiculous when newspaper articles were written about how video games were going to end civilization as we know it. It happens with various genres of music. Most recently, I suppose it was with drill. But it's usually the same lazy old gits who are wanging on about whatever the latest thing is that young people are doing, being a threat to civilization as we know it. And I worry, I think I fell into the trap of thinking that mobile phones were just the latest example of that. Oh, calm down. What on earth are you getting so worked up about? But when you look at what these devices bring into the lives and the minds of these children, then you recognise that something really does have to be done. And as I demonstrated in the first hour, normally I imbue that phrase with a comedy voice, because it is usually the business of unthinking lazy people thumping their desk and demanding that something be done in an arena of something they don't understand. But I understand it. I understand it better than I ever have, largely as a consequence of Monday's programming on LBC. And there it is. If it's not the devices, it's the platforms. You're supposed to be 13 even to sign up, but 70%, more than 70% of primary teachers said they were aware of younger pupils using the platform. More than 70%. And then you've got the absolutely furious resistance of the tech billionaires to inject or to profit from the injection of this poison into our children's lives and our children's minds. It is the Association of School and College Leaders annual conference today, and their president will say, this chaos must end. For too long, tech billionaires have been given immense power without accountability. They hide behind the defense that they are champions of free speech while profiting from platforms that allow harm to fester. Manny Botway, I salute you. I absolutely salute you. Thank you for saying that. It has sometimes, particularly in the arena of pointing out the evil of pretending that the free speech element of this conversation is authentic. It's been a lonely old place. Somebody to put himself, head teacher of a state secondary school in Macclesfield, to put himself to front and centre, pointing out what is evident to anybody honest, that these billionaires are lying about free speech. They've got the White House in their pocket now, and they're doing it to prevent themselves from having to pay to protect our children from filth and poison online. That's it. It's that simple. You think they can't afford it? You think Mark Zuckerberg can't afford to have the biggest fact-checking and moderation program in the history of humanity on board at Meta, at Facebook? You think Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, can't afford to actually have people in place who will make sure that if there's an incitement to racist violence, it disappears in a heartbeat and the person that posted it can never get on that platform again? You think he can't afford it? Do me a favour. Of course they can. It's a combination of greed and callousness that creates the environment in which our children are essentially exposed to all manner of things that most parents don't even know about. That's nice. I do sometimes get the sense that the show is reaching parts it didn't reach before. The first top of my inbox, Terry, says, Manny Botway is my son's head teacher, James. He's an inspiration and he's the reason why we sent our son to Titherington. Thank you, Terry. It's good to know. You're lucky, because this man seems to me to have his head screwed on tighter than almost anybody in the current administration running the United States of America. So, how are we going to do it? How are we going to have our conversation today? I think we're old enough now to... What's the word I want? I think we're old enough now to examine some of the consequences. You remember the story I told you about the 3 boys on the bus watching violent and extreme pornography, one of them with relish, one of them faking relish in order to be in with his mate, who was a sort of ringleader of the trio, and one of them looking absolutely horror-struck, absolutely horrified. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't intervene. Maybe I could have done, maybe I should have done, but I will never forget that little boy's, that 12-year-old boy's face. And this was going back far enough for it to have been notable that one of them even had a smartphone. That's how quickly these wheels have turned. That's how quickly that this world has changed. Back then, so it must be 12 years ago, maybe? I told you about it at the time, and I've told you about it several times since. But the technology was in my pocket, but it was still quite rare to see it in the pocket of a schoolboy, right? That you might be able to work out where it was from then. But he could be 20 now, that lad. He could be in his early 20s now. So here's the question, and I really need you to answer this. How did it mess you up? 0345 60 60 973. I haven't seen Adolescence yet, the new Stephen Graham programme, and I can't wait. I think I'd watch Stephen Graham doing anything. I think he's the finest actor, the best thing to come out of Liverpool since the Beatles. I absolutely love him. He was on the One Show with Robert De Niro last night. I don't know if you saw it. It was close to perfect television. Robert De Niro as Stephen Graham and this lad who's in Adolescence with him. Just anyway, I won't spoil it because I need you to phone me to tell me how it messed you up. We haven't done that. We've waxed lyrical about the threat that it poses to our children. We've spoken parent to parent about what we've discovered going on in the lives of our little ones. But there will be people listening to this now who are plenty old enough to know. There'll be people in their 60s. It's not about what you were exposed to as a child. It's about what you have stumbled across online. Anything at all works that you shouldn't really have ever been able to see, and the impact that it has had upon you and the damage it has done. All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So how do you know that this head teacher is right? How do you know that he's absolutely on the money when he talks about allowing harm to fester? You are old enough and you've been around for long enough to know what harm has festered within you as a consequence of what you have come across online? 0345 6060 973. It might be too big an ask, this. I'm constantly making enormous demands of you. But I'll hold your hand, so to speak. I want to go there. And I want to go there with people who've been there. Not the theoretical conversations or the parental conversations about what our young people are exposed to, but what you know you were exposed to when you were younger, not necessarily young. It could have been something you came across in your foot. The things you wish you'd never seen and the impact you think that it's had on you. All right? And then if that doesn't work, because it's a big ask, as I said, we'll move into the arena of the feasibility of, in the words of this head teacher, bringing these people into line, getting these social media operators brought to heel. We can do both, actually, but let's start with that. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 11, Mike writes, when I was much younger, someone who I now realise was a far-right groomer showed me footage of a beheading. Trying to explain to my nephew why he doesn't need to watch this stuff without actually making him curious and accidentally encouraging him to do so is not easy. I hadn't thought of it that way around, Mike. It's powerfully put. What is it? What is the stuff that you know had a... and it doesn't have to be, graphic or explicit. It could be words. But the stuff that you found online and you know that if it didn't ruin your life, it certainly made things much, much less pleasant than they needed to be. 0345 6060 973. I'm a 22-year-old woman, writes Grace. I remember seeing graphic self-harm pictures of a girl from my dance school on Instagram when I was 13. I'd never seen anything like it before, but I intrinsically knew it was not how I or other teenage girls should deal with emotions. I internalized it, and years later I started self-harming. I see it as an addiction that I will always have and will need to manage, but thankfully I have been clean for many months now. And that, of course, plays into some of the horrible stories, some of the tragedies that are all too familiar to us, of young girls in particular, who went down the route that Grace describes. It just shouldn't be there. I can't believe it's taken me so long to get to a position of such confident fury, is how I would describe it. God knows how we got our girls through relatively unscathed, as far as I know. But the stories we should have heard, Molly Russell, the stories we should have heard, Brianna Guy, that should have just made us go to the people that own these platforms. You cannot come round our house and post this stuff through our letterbox. So how the hell are we allowing you to become the richest men in the world while you are posting it through our virtual letterboxes into the bedrooms of our children? This hasn't happened to me for a long time, actually, and it's because of Monday. I know it's because of Monday. So blew the lid off, blew the doors off, really. And that idea that, wind your neck in, James. It's just the latest moral panic, or wind your neck in, your kids are okay, wind your neck in, it's only a tiny minority. How can we be allowing the richest men in the world to get richer without taking any not only not taking any responsibility at all for the stuff that we're being exposed to, but also pretending that attempts to make the world a better place are somehow assaults upon our free speech? Monica's in Bracknell. Monica, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. I would like to tell you about my experience. That was back in 2016.
Yeah.
I was just lying in bed looking on stuff online, and suddenly this horrendous video appeared. That was to do with the terrorist attack in Nice in France.
Oh gosh, yes.
That video appeared there for only like a few minutes, but it was enough for me to see what I've seen. That stuff triggered massive anxiety and depression in me. I had to be treated for it, and yes, it was just horrendous. Absolutely horrendous things to see. It was. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that on the radio. It was like
no, you can.
Bodies there, and it was just horrendous. And I can't understand why this stuff can be actually online. I would not like my children to see anything like that because I know what happened to me. I couldn't work. I was just basically petrified.
Yes.
I've seen, and literally something needs to be done about it, because if that could trigger a 40-year-old woman to state like that, I don't want to think what that would do to my kids.
And it may not do anything to them. Or it may not have anything like as profound an impact as it had upon you. That's kind of the point. And I think this head teacher that we've been talking about will make this point later in his speech. It will be a relatively small percentage of people who have the strongest reaction. And there's clearly no doubt in your mind that this contributed to your psychological disorders later in life.
Absolutely.
And that will be an extreme response to it. But then you've got the entire graph of other responses all the way back down to nothing. With the damage that is being done is incalculable.
It is, and it's just unbelievable, and something needs to be done about it, definitely. We're trying to protect our children from it as much as we possibly can, but it's just there, and there's only so much you can do. But like you said, the richest man in the world, they can't do nothing about it.
Yeah, it's mad, right? I wish I'd thought of it like that before, but better late than never, Monica. You're the richest man in the world, and you can't afford to stop this stuff from arriving in our inbox, arriving in our feeds, in our profiles. Oh, it's an affront to free speech. You can't say anything online anymore. We're locking people up for memes. Come on, join the dots. It's obvious what they're doing. Whether they're bright enough to realise it or not, I do not know. But it's obvious what they are doing. All this nonsense about free speech. All the J.D. Vance giving a speech about the threats that Europe faces and not mentioning Russia or China, but talking about a family planning clinic in Glasgow. Unbelievable. And unfolding in plain sight. And, of course, they've got all the money and, therefore, all the power. It is coming up to 29 minutes after 11. I'm not going to go to Travis's next, but I'm not going to go to him because the news is on the horizon. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a quick missed information, actually, because this is a story we didn't cover yesterday. But goodness knows, loads of people did.
Missed information.
So were you familiar yesterday, I think it was in every paper, that the fire service in London had advised London Underground stations to remove book swap stands. There's one near me, actually, at Northfield Station, and they're great. And the reason was, or the idea was, that they are a fire risk. And it seemed like a bit of a strange story, didn't it? But, of course, people who work in the arena of fire prevention will tell you why it came about in the first place. But if you were getting excited about that story yesterday, then you would almost certainly have given a lot of coverage today to the news that the Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, has moved to reinstate them all. He has taken a stand, an intervention that he is entitled to do, and ordered the shelves, which encourage commuters to leave and take used books for their commute, to be reinstated. So I suppose on a scale of 1 to 10, however excited you were about this yesterday, you will now be equally excited and desperate to share the news that Sadiq Khan has moved to actually undo the supposed damage.
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. James, I work in video and CCTV forensics, and sometimes we are exposed to some pretty disturbing stuff. We're trained to play Tetris after viewing something disturbing, as viewing rapid colours with associated concentration stops the disturbing images being imprinted on the mind. I just thought I would pass that on. Thank you, Andrew. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. I mean, if you ever played Tetris for appreciable amounts of time, you will find it very, very easy to believe that it can act as a sort of form of mind bleach. You can close your eyes sometimes after an hour on the game, and you can still hear the music and see all the blocks falling. But what do you look back on and know that things you found online had an incredibly negative impact on your life? And you don't have to have been a child when it happened. I think we've made a mistake in seeing this as a threat exclusively to children. If you want to join in the conversation, you know the number. Travis is in Liverpool. Travis, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Long-time listener, first-time call. I'm a little nervous.
It's only me. Don't worry. Take all the time you want.
Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about is YouTube. I won't mention any names, and the ability for it to radicalize people so quickly. So I was about 14 at the time. I'm 21 now.
Yeah.
And I originally got onto this from watching what were called anti-SJW compilations. They appeared on your feed. They were massive everywhere.
This is anti-social justice warriors.
Yeah, sorry. So this is like also like feminism, anti-black protesters.
Yeah.
And these videos were made to sort of demean them. So if they were like getting quite emotional, it was to demean them. And this led me on to certain accounts that were a bit more extreme. So they were like conspiracy theories about like immigration and saying horrible things about like all migrants and boosting like misinformation, and it fills your head with these things. And when you're 14 years old, you don't have the brain to say, okay, this is wrong or we're missing information here.
Sure.
And so when I was 14, I was learning all these things, and I was believing, oh, I know the truth. Nobody else knows the truth. And I was taking these things into like my discussions with friends, or I'd like mention them in class, and it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. But
you thought you were right, though. You weren't just doing it to shock or to draw attention to yourself. You thought you had answers to questions. You thought you had information that was being denied to some of your friends and your peers about, I mean, I guess it's going to be women, people of colour and immigrants.
Yeah, a big thing was immigrants and trans people.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So, like, because these things were quite big, around about like 2016 to like 2018 time, around about that area. And one of the big things that kind of gave me a shock and was this was wrong was you said some of this, transphobic bilge to one of my friends who had a trans sister.
Gosh.
And she just completely cut me off. And at that point, I was like, God, what have I been saying? Like,
how nasty do you think you got? I mean, I get. Did you know she had a trans sister when you sent the material across? You did. Yeah. So were you trying to upset her, or?
No, I was just basically putting my viewpoint forward. So
okay.
It was the thing you always hear about with like bathrooms. I was like, that they shouldn't be in bathrooms. It's just absolutely horrible transphobic stuff.
Sure.
And it quite upset her. And at this point, I was so in these circles because these channels, they'll lead you to Discord servers where you can like talk to people.
Right.
So Discord's an online chatting like app where you can talk to lots of people and being a big group. And your head just becomes so filled. And the problem with YouTube is when you see one video, it gives you 5 more, and you want it, and it auto plays them. So you think, oh, I'll watch this now, or what's this?
And this is what we talked about on Monday. It's an attention economy now. So your value to them is your time, your attention, and therefore the algorithm or the platform is engineered in a way to secure as much of your time as possible. And if you've demonstrated a proclivity for this kind of content, then by definition they have to keep feeding you, and it has to get worse.
Yeah, and it's so hard to get out of because these algorithms as well, they won't show you the other side of the argument. It's called, like an echo chamber.
Yeah. Google, of course, is the owner of YouTube. I bet there's plenty of people listening who don't even realise that because the concentration of power and wealth is relatively tiny. What how hard was it for you to because you realised you don't want to be a person that causes such upset to someone that you cared for.
I'm completely different now. I'm one of the most left-wing people.
You're a proper social justice warrior. But how hard was it? How hard was it to break the habit, as it were?
It is hard because you have this little voice in the back of your head that still believes all these things, and you'll see stuff about immigration, and this isn't right. This is so. It's all misinformation, and what's right, but there's a little voice in the back of your head saying, is there too many coming over, or are they dangerous? And it's eventually you do get out of it, and one of the big things is learning about it and trying to find as many resources. And also with the things about trans people, I met a couple of trans people in the circles that I was in at the time, and I was like, oh, these aren't the people that I've been told about. These are these are lovely people.
Yeah.
And you kind of...
I'm glad you were listening today, because I think there's a temptation to think of, violent sexual abuse and footage of rape, or, as our earlier caller told us, footage of terror attacks and hideous beheadings and all that kind of thing. But actually, it can be conversations as well. It can just be propaganda coupled with, when you get onto Discord and you get onto the chat rooms, a sort of bogus sense of community, a sense of... let me just have a look in my inbox and see if I can find something that fits into this kind of I'm not going to have anything now. I've normally got full confidence in my inbox, but I wonder whether I've got anything that's come in already from the kind of people who don't realise that they are in the space that you describe, that they are still in it. Yeah, there's one. It's got a slightly rude word in the beginning of it, but I don't know if I can read it all out. But can I say that word on the radio? I'll come back to that later. But the people who are in it are absolutely adamant that you're the problem. So you now have become unmasculine. You have become part of the problem. You have become, I don't know what the word would be, the enemy almost.
Nowadays they'd call you woke and say that you've been brainwashed, all that stuff. And in those circles, it's quite isolating.
Yes,
because they'll make you believe that everyone that believes these things wants to hurt you and wants to hurt the people around you. And so that keeps you in even deeper, and it's
very powerful, isn't it? It's a very powerful drug. Why do you think? Because people are frightened. You saw that during the Farage riots. People honestly thought that they were somehow protecting children from other human beings by setting fire to hotels full of refugees. What at 14? Because a lot of your mates at 14 didn't go down this road. What do you think made you vulnerable to it, Travis?
So one of the things is I don't talk. I don't go out much. I'm not a sporty person. Yeah. I'm not. I don't go out a tremendous amount. So I do spend a lot of the time watching YouTube.
Yes.
And one of the big things that gets people my age into these things is a lot of the accounts that post this stuff. They'll mention something like, I don't even remember when the Star Wars sequels came out, and there was a black lead. A lot of the people were like, "Oh, they're ruining Star Wars. The SJWs got on Star Wars." So they'll take something that you like video games or like movies, and they'll tell you that these people are ruining them. And that's one of the things that got me in. I think it was some gaming stuff, and being told that feminism is going to be ruining gaming.
Yes, that was Gamergate, wasn't it? Because I think it plays a big part in this process, probably underestimated by people like me who should have been paying more attention. Here you go. I found one, Travis. This is Gary. He goes, "Here we go again. Loony left mangina, James O'Brien, advocating for the censorship of anything that don't include a utopian world where we all poop pink Twinkies. Let them watch so we as a country can desensitize the young, because let's be real, World War III is imminent and we will need fighting men, not yellow bellies such as yourself." So, there is someone who, sounds comical, but they really mean it. They really believe the stuff that you used to be exposed to.
There's the strongman narrative that everyone has to be there's never any weakness allowed. There's never any space for that stuff. But the strongest men show compassion for people suffering genuinely.
Of course they do. Of course they do. You're I don't know how comfortable you are taking compliments, but David in Reigate says this caller is amazing. Clive in Sydney says, what a self-realised caller Travis is. Quite a few people describing you in very positive terms, and I guess, in a way, much respect for the guy you're currently talking with, James says, Nick, in a way, do you ever wonder about the path not taken? Do you ever wonder where you'd be now if you hadn't got off this horse?
I'm terrified of it.
On the other hand, you could be Vice President of the United States of America, Travis, if you got the right visas and the right passport.
With the stuff nowadays, like Andrew Tate, and with people actually going out, we saw with the Farage rights. the Farage riots impacted me a lot because I had a thought in my head of, what if I was there?
Yes,
you know,
of course.
If I went down this path, I would probably be there with them, and it's horrible to think about.
Yes, it is, and yet, of course, the kind of people who are profiting enormously, not just the platform owners, but also the people getting paid by them to disseminate this stuff and spread this stuff, would have loved the idea of having an extra body on the ground, even if it led to you ending up in jail while they stayed safe behind their keyboards. Travis, thank you. That was special, and I'm really grateful to you. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47. Keith just ruined my day. Do you know how Keith has ruined my day? Am I not allowed to say? Oh, are you sure? Surely the interview's going to... He was on the One Show last night. Well, I might have just given it away, but at least I didn't say it out loud. 12 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Wondering why, and I don't think anyone is, to be honest, why the conversation about weapons-grade misogyny, about the appalling damage being done to people, not just young people, of course, and why it is so inextricably linked to the current administration in the United States. Obviously, J.D. Vance spewing nonsense about free speech in the context of this country while locking people up for protesting, threatening to deport people in the United States of America. That line from Columbia University, you might want to pay attention. If you're listening, just if I'm background noise in your life, just bring me to the foreground briefly. Because students who are not US citizens at Columbia University have been told to avoid publishing work on Gaza, on Ukraine, and on any protests related to the arrest of their former classmate. That's the guy who used to work for the British government in Syria and who was an organizer of pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University and has now been locked up with a threat of deportation. He has a green card. He's a naturalized American and is married to an American woman. Stuart Carl is a First Amendment lawyer and professor at the university, and it is him who told them to clear their social media of anything. And this is the faculty from the journalism school being told to limit their own freedoms of speech, to censor. With about 2 months to go before graduation, they were told that their academic accomplishments or even their freedom could be at risk if they attracted the anger of the Trump administration. Listen to this. If you have a social media page, make sure it is not filled with commentary on the Middle East. And when a Palestinian student objected, the dean of the journalism school, a man called Jelani Cobb, stood up and said to the entire student body, "Nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times." That's journalism students at Columbia University in the United States being told to avoid posting, publishing, writing anything that might upset the current administration in the United States of America, and being told by their own dean, the dean of their school, nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times. And J.D. Vance stands up in Munich and claims that our freedom of speech is somehow under threat because of some nonsense about family planning clinics. The man that I'm talking about is Mahmoud Khalil, a recent graduate who has been removed from university. He's been arrested by immigration agents. He was living in university housing and looks set to be deported. It subsequently emerged that he worked for the UK government in Syria previously. And if you wonder why the violent misogyny leads back to the White House, have a little listen to this.
Who's your favorite Irish person? Oh, there's so many. Are you kidding me? Well, I do happen to like your fighter. He's got the best tattoos I've ever seen. I don't know if I'm a big fan, but that. Conor McGregor. Boy, you have. Well, Conor's great, right?
So that's Donald Trump being asked who his favourite Irishman is. I mean, off the top of your head, go on, have a go. Oscar Wilde, Brendan Behan, James Joyce, Barry McGuigan. Who's your favourite Irishman? Samuel Beckett, Roy Keane. I mean, anyone you want. Donald Trump chose Conor McGregor. who, as you will know, in November of last year, a woman who accused Conor McGregor of raping her won her claim against him for damages in a civil case. He was ordered to pay her just shy of €250,000 in damages. And that's the man that Donald Trump chose as his favourite Irishman. So you listen to Travis in Liverpool and you think, oh, wouldn't happen to me. My boy would be all right. You've got the President of the United States of America. And we've got our own pound shop version here. How many prizes do you expect for knowing that Nigel Farage has been photographed doing a thumbs up in the company of both Conor McGregor and Andrew Tate? So violent misogyny. Oh, young men can't say what they want to say in this country anymore. They can't even go for a pint. And that leads to our friend Gary, whose message I read out a moment ago. That's how it happens. It's how it works. And the people who are making money out of this are terrified of regulation. They're terrified of having to stop this sort of poison being available on tap 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I don't really understand why, because the only thing it's going to cost them is a few quid, and they're already the richest people in the world. Danielle's in Egham. Danielle, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
I actually wanted to talk on the feasibility of putting in place policies that would actually stop these companies from putting all sorts of nonsense in front of our children. So I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for about 10 years. I'm also a mum to 4 children. And I've seen the impact on my students and on, the occasional thing that comes through when the primary school sends you a message saying, oh, watch out for this thing if your children are saying this thing. It's really shocking when you find these things and when you hear what's being said. And for me, in terms of policy points, I think our government absolutely can do something because they already have begun to do. They've taken steps in the direction of protecting our children. They're just not done. I think it needs to be a case where we tell these companies, you cannot provide this app in this country unless it is A, sanitized for the use of children. We actually have AI technology that can do that now. It recognizes what may appear to be I'm not sure if I can say this word on radio, but a particular part of a woman's anatomy. If it can detect that, it can detect certain things that are being
not hard, is it? It wouldn't be that.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a bit. I don't even think it's lazy anymore to point out that it's almost impossible to place a bet online if you're not old enough to do so without stealing somebody else's credit card and
exactly.
So they could easily do this. I mean. And if it was, if these were startups with questionable futures, then you could understand the reluctance to do it, because if we start paying money for that and spending money on this, then we may not survive to the end of the year. But they're not. They are literally, this is the point where my voice goes up several octaves, Danielle. They are literally the richest men in the world. Literally. Yeah. And yet they won't do it.
I actually think of it as some sort of sick social experiment. Elon Musk in particular, I believe he's having an experiment in some kind of social engineering, but that's an opinion for a different time. I think our government actually has the power to be able to put into place policy points that mean that, one, if you're going to use one of these apps, you must. So you know how we have with the online banking apps, you have to show your face, you have to show ID. Once that's checked, then, you can use the app. I think children should, if they're going to use an app, they should have, it should be 18 plus or whatever age, and you need to verify that with ID. I don't see any reason, and check that ID is your ID by scanning your face. I know there's a different form of privacy there that might be contravened by that, but it's
an absolute priority. If you want to carry on doing business, you want to carry on making any money at all, these are the things that you're going to have to do.
Absolutely.
Ironically enough, it's not exactly rocket science, Danielle, as Jamie points out with the reference to Elon Musk. Thank you. And there are phrases that are unhelpful. Chapter 366. Oh, you can't get the genie back in the bottle. Something I used to say every 10 minutes when we were having conversations like, you can't get the genie back in the bottle. Or it's just another moral panic, like all the ones that we've had before that didn't signal the end of civilization as we know it. This is, not necessarily signalling the end of civilization as we know it, but the more you read into the beliefs of some of these people, the more you know that they do not like civilization as it currently is. Peter Thiel, one of the key players in this world, has said that he no longer thinks democracy and freedom are compatible, has a particular problem with welfare claimants and women, according to his own writings. And then the President of the United States of America is asked who his favourite Irishman is, and he comes up with a man who had to pay £250,000 to a woman who accused him of raping her in a civil case. It's 11:57. Steve's in Nottingham. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Bit nervous.
It's only me.
Yeah, plus 2 million.
1.5.
You said...
Fact check, 1.5, I think. Go on. I haven't got long, so I'll shut up and you talk.
No, sorry. You said a bit ago something that kind of hit me. It couldn't be my kid, is what a lot of parents think.
Yes.
I was that kid.
Yeah.
Before the age of about 13, I was nice as pie, really quiet, undiagnosed kind of low-key autism, so I was, always the most politest little boy.
Yes.
For the summer holiday, I wanted to play a game called RuneScape, which was online. This shows just how old I am, because that was fairly new at the time. Over the course of that summer, with unrestricted access to the internet, because my parents never thought I could be that kid,
right.
I, by the end of that summer, had seen...
Hey, take it easy. You don't have to go there. You can use the most broad of descriptions that you want, or nothing at all.
Hardcore content, and footage of people dying,
right.
And
13 years old.
Seeing it at that age, did a real number on me. By the time I was in my late teens, I was completely desensitized to all of it. I would, and I'm a very different person now. I'm not proud of the man that I was.
Oh, well done.
But it's important to point out that anyone can become this. I would frequent image boards where people would post content of people dying in horrific ways, because it was funny for us.
You as a form of addiction kicks in here, and I don't know what it is, whether it's chemical, whether it's the chemicals that are being released in your brain, or whether it is that sort of therapeutic practice whereby you try and convince yourself that you're not traumatized, and the best way of doing that is to look at more of this stuff and just pretend or even believe on some level that it's funny, whereas on another level it is doing you untold harm and damage.
Yeah, and what you've got to understand is there's people online out there who will propagate that, half because they themselves find it funny, and half because,
well, they might be as damaged as you are, but they're just further down the road of pretending otherwise, or trying to negate their own trauma.
Well, some of them find it hilarious to re-traumatize new people.
Yeah, of course they do, because there are some bad people out there. What broke the spell, if you don't mind me asking?
My ex-girlfriend, who was with me for 10 years, broke up with me. It was...
Well, you could have gone the other way. You could have gone full Andrew Tate at that point, couldn't you?
I very nearly did.
Yeah.
I, at the time, was subscribed to a lot of... like I think it was Travis earlier, I was subscribed to a lot of anti-feminist rhetoric on the internet, a lot of anti-religious rhetoric. Some people who are now endorsed by... discount Donald Trump over here. But
did you say discount Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I like that. I'm having that. That's a nice slight variation on Pound Shot. Yeah, you're right. Some of these people are. He's part of the same phenomenon, apparently. So can you put your finger on what broke, why you made the break? Apart from, after she'd broken up with you, why you didn't, why you are the man you are today, and a few messages are saying you should be proud of who you are today. Here's Andrew in Penzance. This caller should be proud of the man that he is now. What helped? Do you know? You might not know. It might just be luck.
I think it was just taking a good, as cliche as it is, I think I just took a good long look in the mirror and realised I hated what I was seeing. Realised that I think it was seeing who I was as a kid, and thinking, what the hell happened?
Yeah, it's little you having a consciousness of the child. Even as I said a moment ago, there are some bad people. I still, whether it's because of my upbringing, my religious upbringing, Steve, I still don't fully believe that. I think people end up that way as a consequence of things that have been done to them. And one way, if not the best way to undo it, is to remember the little people, remember the little version of yourself. Thank you, mate. That was really important, really helpful, and very powerful. But I'm with Andrew in Penzance. You should be proud of the man you are now. And possibly not helpful for the rest of us to sort of think that, as we pointed out, that, oh, no, I'd be all right. It wouldn't happen to me. It wouldn't happen to mine. Must be something wrong with these guys. I think possibly it could happen to almost anybody.
James O'Brien on LBC.
minutes after 12. I told you on Monday we were going to be doing more on this kind of stuff. We would broadly describe it as online safety. I think the fact that we're doing it already on a Friday speaks to the absolute urgency of it. I honestly can't see any more important issue facing the government at the moment than reining in these, as you just heard that head teacher saying in the news, reining in the owner of these platforms. Any other context in which people were profiting from doing to some of the callers that we had in the last hour the things that they described, literally profiting from doing it, while claiming that it has absolutely nothing to do with them, washing their hands of all responsibility. In the case of Elon Musk, joining in with some of the processes and behaviours that could be described as radicalising. If it was any other context, any other medium, any traditional medium, if these were letters coming through our letterbox or magazines for sale in W.H. Smith's or papers in the newsagent, books that were in the libraries, there's just absolutely no way that we'd all be pretending or behaving as if it's perfectly normal and not shocking at all. A couple of other things I want to share with you. I haven't done any. I did one missing word round this week, but it was from last week. It was the one I'd forgotten to do the week before. Wombats are in the news. I've tried to stop using wombat as an insult. It's very hard to know what words you can use as an insult without offending somebody. And I don't mean that in a politically correct, isn't it awful, you can't say anything these days. I mean, I don't like offending people. I said Chinese whispers earlier, and someone suggested that might be racist. I don't think it is, but I haven't double-checked, which is why I quite like this story. I was going to do it as a missing word round, but it's pretty obvious. The Sun, which remains unchallenged in the realms of winning headlines. You can't get the Humpty if someone calls you a numpty. So this is a tribunal. An employment judge has ruled that calling someone a numpty is actually perfectly acceptable. It came in the case of a Metropolitan Police sergeant who took offence at the phrase. It was used twice, allegedly, by a chief inspector in Counter-Terrorism Command in a conversation when he was off sick in 2022. But the judge has thrown out his claims of race discrimination and harassment, disability discrimination and harassment, victimisation and whistle-blowing detriment, because the worst thing that he could accuse her of was calling him a numpty. The judge said, "We do not consider that the term numpty has any racial or disability connotations, and in the context that it was used in what we consider to be a light-hearted manner, not one which was capable of constituting harassment." So there it is. I can say numpty. I can call anyone I want a numpty now without any problems of numpty. You're a numpty. You're a numpty. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. In terms of what we're going to do next as a conversation, I want to turn your attention to something that is among my favourite subjects, actually, among all the time we spend together. We've talked about variations on a similar theme before, and it also speaks to the conversation about cuts. It is a call from a veritable constellation of stars to stop, to reverse, to halt planned cuts to particularly drama and music in the classroom. And I want to approach this conversation in the way that we always approach it. I want you to... And the bit I don't know how to do, the bit I'm not very good at, is the bit where I want to say something like, people will be surprised to learn that about you. But how can I say that without sounding snobbish? Do you understand what I'm even alluding to? Or am I being too cryptic? So what I guess I'm saying is that you want a sort of 6'5" tattooed welder to ring in and talk about how much he loves Rigoletto or how much he loves ballet, and that he has that relationship with that art form as a consequence of something that happened at school. I guess in a way a little bit of reverse snobbery kicks in, and if you are I don't know what the word would be, but yes I do. If you're part of the metropolitan liberal elite, then it is not that surprising that you like going to the theatre. Am I right? I don't know if you've seen the prices lately. You have to be part of the metropolitan liberal elite to go to the theatre, to go to see some shows in the West End. It's absolutely shocking. I'm very, very blessed in so many ways. as I never tire of telling you, but when it comes to having the privilege of being invited to the theatre by producers and press officers, I sometimes count my lucky stars when I see the price of relatively modest tickets. Prices start, I saw one the other day, I forget which play it was, prices start at £245 to see one of the West End shows at the moment that's got a Hollywood star in it. Prices start at £245. But that's not necessarily the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation is the difference that it has made to you. It's not confined to the right wing. You know, I've got a pet theory about fascism and empathy. I think one of the reasons why they like to burn books, why they like to mock the arts, why they like to pretend or possibly even believe. J.D. Vance recently, or not long ago, said that he couldn't believe people actually listened to classical music for fun, for enjoyment. I think he thought they were all lying or being pretentious. He turned up at the Kennedy Center in New York last night and got booed. I don't know if have we got audio of that? Do you want to have a listen to J.D. Vance turning up at the Kennedy Center, where Donald Trump has put himself as head of the board because he didn't like all the woke stuff that was happening at the Kennedy Center before. It's like a massive arts center is it in New York City or is it in Washington, D.C.? I'm not sure. It's in Washington, D.C. And they said to him, what shows didn't you like? And he said, I've never been to any. So that, in a way, is woke in a nutshell, isn't it? There's too much woke stuff going on at that place. Which bits don't you? I've never been there. But I'm sacking the boss and replacing him with myself. And then his little deputy, his little mini-me, J.D. Vance, turned up at a National Symphony Orchestra concert at the Kennedy Center on Thursday, and this happened. 12 minutes after 12 is the time. Did you hear me then? I thought the mic was off. I was saying to Eleanor, I can't find the story. No, it was off apparently. So I just sounded like an amateur then for no reason whatsoever. American audiences are a bit different from British audiences. If you ever go and see a show on Broadway, every time a big character comes on, they get a special round of applause. It's like it's got a slightly more variety feel to it almost. But that would not be normal behaviour at the Kennedy Center for the audience to start booing and caterwauling like that at the vice president. But it speaks to a disdain for culture, a disdain for the arts that is not confined to the right, although, as you know, my theory is that they do it in order to kill empathy. I think the best harvester of empathy is culture. The only time you ever really imagine what it's like to be somebody else is through art. You think about the post office drama, all the coverage we gave to the post office scandal, not this programme specifically, but the media. The coverage was huge. The political appetite for that conversation was enormous. And yet it didn't land with the UK public until they turned it into a television drama. And when they turned it in Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, when it became a television drama, the whole thing changed. You are empathetic by nature. And when it was turned into a drama, you could imagine it being you on the receiving end of that appalling treatment. You couldn't imagine it being you when you were reading it in a newspaper or hearing it being talked about on the radio. It's actually why this show relies much more heavily on experiences than it does on opinions, because an experience will generate empathy in a way that an opinion won't. So if you were listening to Travis in the last hour or the lad at the end, was it Daniel? The lad at the end describing their experiences online, their hideous experiences online, you're much more likely to develop empathy listening to them talking about it than you are listening to me ranting and raving about it. That's the way that it works. And that is why I think historically the far right hates culture, hates art, hates anything that lets you, for example, imagine what it might be like to be a refugee, rather than just going online to receive an undiluted diatribe about how awful they all are. Shirley Ballas, Dame Arlene Phillips and the cellist Julian Lloyd-Webber are among hundreds of artists calling on the government to reverse cuts to music and drama in state schools. It's a letter to today's Times featuring 700 creatives calling on the government to stop the cuts. A government-commissioned curriculum and an assessment review must serve as a turning point for arts education in Britain. This is not current government policy. They're calling for a halt, if you like, to what has been in place since 2010. Can anyone remember what happened in 2010 that might be of political significance in the United Kingdom? Anybody? Bueller? Yeah, you're right. And so since 2010, creative subjects have started disappearing from state schools. I'm going to give you the list. Art, dance, design, drama, and music education. are in danger of becoming, in the words of these letter writers, the preserve of the wealthy. And here's how I want to do it. If you hadn't been introduced to art, dance, design, drama or music education at school, how would your life be different today? 0345 6060 973. Now, you might be a principal cellist in the London Symphony Orchestra, and if it wasn't for the fact that the council that educated you had a scheme by which you could get instruments, you never would have been a cellist. So that I want your call, 0345 6060 973. But I wonder if you can also meet me halfway on the emotional impact rather than the actual material impact, because I really enjoyed the conversation we had earlier this week with the Danish economist Emma, who was talking to us about feminist economy and the way in which you can easily put a value on work, paid work, but the value that you put on caring has to be measured in a different currency. You can't just measure it in money, not least because we pay carers, child carers, carers for the elderly, carers for the disabled. We pay them a pittance, which sends a message throughout society, both explicit and implicit, that this sort of work isn't worth much, and yet it is. I said to her when she was in the studio, imagine getting to the pearly gates and you've got a big shot trader and a nurse, and St. Peter is there with his big book about what value you brought to the world in your life, and that key word there is value. What value did you bring to the world in your life? And the idea that the trader is going to be able to trump the nurse, despite the fact that he earned more in an hour than she earned in a year. Do you see what I mean about the meaning of value? And then there's that great Oscar Wilde quote about a cynic being somebody who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So it's not just about what impact it's had on your life in measurable material terms. It's about who you would be if you hadn't been introduced to poetry, if you hadn't been introduced to theatre or music. I don't know why, I keep thinking of old Gary, who sent in that weird message not long ago that I read to you. That to me sounds like somebody who has never really been helped to appreciate culture or helped to appreciate art, has never really known what it would be like to step out of the tumult, the maelstrom of his own mind. So you wouldn't be who you are today if it wasn't for the creative subjects that you had access to at school, and most helpfully state school. But we won't confine it to that, because the stories still work even if you didn't go to the sort of school that is now losing these services, losing these subjects. And 18 minutes after 12, I'm going to do it, and I know it makes me sound a bit snobbish, but I don't know if that's a problem or even if I'm using the word snobbish correctly. But what I want as well is that you are someone whose friends and family can't quite believe what your passion is, because outwardly you defy all the stereotypes of, for example, a ballet fan or an opera fan or a poetry fan or a theatre fan. To judge a book by its cover, which of course we are taught never to do, but if you were to be judged by your cover, nobody would believe the cultural life that you live. That doesn't sound snobbish, does it? I think that's okay. 0345 6060 973. How would your life have been worse if it wasn't for the introduction of creative culture, creative subjects, cultural pursuits, art, dance, design, drama, music at a relatively early age? Hit the humbers. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 20 past 12.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 22 minutes after 12. Listen, I know there are lots of Irish. Annabelle says, I'm half an hour behind here. I love it when I get a message from someone who's listening on catch-up, because I'm talking from the future. I don't know why it makes me feel like Marty McFly. I told you this yesterday. They're in the well, don't overthink it, Keith. I'm now in their future. I'm in Annabelle's future. She's listening to what is, to all intents and purposes, a live radio show, but I'm half an hour ahead of her, which means if she carries on listening, she'll hear me read out the message complaining that I didn't mention Cillian Murphy. You're having a go at me for not mentioning Cillian Murphy in the context of a conversation about Donald Trump being asked who his favourite Irishman was and coming up with Conor McGregor. there is a long, long list of famous Irishmen and women. Edna O'Brien, Auntie Edna, you'd have put on that list, wouldn't you? But that wasn't the point, Annabelle. And I think you know that. Anyway, staying with culture, matters cultural. Bridget Phillipson has ordered a review of curriculum and assessment. Professor Becky Francis is expected to publish interim findings next week. And a letter published in the Times today calls upon the government to halt cuts, reverses, removals of creative subjects. Where would you be now, do you think, if you hadn't had them when you were at school? Laura is in South Nutfield. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. It's lovely to talk to you. This is one of my pet subjects. I get so cross.
Well, you've come to the right place, Laura.
I'm now retired, but as a school child, I was given the opportunity with music. I have free violin lessons. My school were giving me so much support. They found I had a voice. I went to a music centre. I eventually became an opera singer, and I would not have gone down that road if it hadn't. I know, but this is true. This is the opportunity I was given, and it is being taken away by what's happening.
What was your background? What was your family like? Your family life?
I was brought up by a single parent mum. My mother, Beryl, bless her, gorgeous woman, fantastic woman, who just said, we are in this mess all together. I had a twin brother, and she said our only way out of this is education, and she gave us every opportunity. You know, she drove us everywhere. For me, for orchestral rehearsals, came to every single concert. She hated classical music. She absolutely hated it.
Even after you became an opera singer, you didn't convert
absolutely,
her.
But she was there
Beryl.
at every single performance. After I had children, I then went into teaching. And what really annoys me also about this is I taught so many dyslexic, so many special needs children, and how music opens up their mind when academic subjects fail them. And there are so many huge performers who have dyslexia, who have autism, who have Asperger's, and they find their way through music, and they're being denied this.
That's a really good point that I wouldn't have thought of, actually, if you hadn't have said it. And do we know, I mean, drawing more upon the teaching than the opera singing, do we know whether or not, if it were now, would the paths that you went down be open to children now, even?
I mean, the state schools still do concerts. They put on concerts. But if you want to do it seriously and you want to get your way forward, you have to have money to have private lessons. Music tuition is not cheap, and
someone took you under their wing. Can you remember the first time someone told you could make a career as a singer? Can you remember where you were?
I joined a church choir,
right?
And I always got given the solo, at christenings and weddings, and I had a very friendly neighbour, and he was in the church choir as well, and he said, Laura, have you thought about doing this? I said, what do you mean about doing this? And he said, well, using your voice. And I said, well, not really. And then I joined a drama group as well, a youth theatre group, which again was free.
Yeah, it would have been publicly funded, free. Wouldn't it, as well? Charity, with some
musical
subsidy.
Theatre. I got involved in that. And then as an 18-year-old leaving school, I auditioned for a music conservatory and got in, and that was it. That my path was made, and my school enabled that. I feel comprehensive, and every music teacher I've had has just bolstered me up and given me every opportunity.
And that is what they're worried about. All of them are worried about the disappearance or the decline or the diminishment, and you can see why. And of course, that other line that it would otherwise become the preserve of the wealthy, you can already see happening in acting a bit. I mentioned Stephen Graham earlier, the Liverpudlian actor who is he's just up there. He's completely incredible as an actor. And yet, so many of his generation of actors went to schools like mine, you know, the kind of Tom Hiddlestons and the Benedict Cumberbatches. It goes in cycles. We're back to the pendulums, but I bet it's a heck of a lot harder now to break through as an actor, get supported while you're not working, get training, than it was when I left school in 1990. Laura, thank you. Tom's in Stockport. I've got time for this, I think. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
When I was... I developed a speech impediment as an early child, and being able to communicate with the world was something that I found drastically difficult. And as well as a kind of speech therapist and things like that my parents were trying to get me in front of, drama and acting and having the ability to perform, and teachers around me sort of giving me the opportunity to get on the stage, that opportunity to build my confidence, I would say is fundamental with me being able to communicate with the world now than I ever have been. It was significant, you know. I ended up through years and years of therapy as well, moving forward, and I ended up doing quite a lot of acting exams through LAMDA, kind of grade 6, grade 7, all the way through to distinction, and ended up going to university. And most of my life, in my personal life now, is absorbed with the arts, and it's all down to that.
I mean, oddly, you could quite easily make a case to a cynic, couldn't you, for the material value of what you've just described, for the you know, the contributions that you make to society, and the work that you do, and all, not just in your personal life. You don't have to just define or distinguish between the cash value and the cultural value. The cultural value will have a cash value as well for many people, because where would you be as a human being if you'd remained trapped in that speech impediment defined cage?
Absolutely. I would also state, which is, I think, of significance, is that I'm 34 years old. So when I was in school, mobile phones, social media and internet were kind of not around, or really in its infancy. There is more than ever now with these young children, with a variety of challenges that they're overcoming, being able to have the opportunity to get on a stage and perform and to get out of their shell. It becomes
more urgent. You're so right. It becomes more urgent as an alternative to the solipsistic pursuits that the online world offers. It's another really good. There's three things there I hadn't thought of before, and we've done this subject before. In various different forms. Tom, take care, mate. It was for fans of Stockport or the cognoscenti of Stockport. The pub I was referring to yesterday was indeed the Friendship Inn in Romilly. I've got no idea whether it's still there or not. 12:31 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:34. Actually, my guest on Full Disclosure this week is a really good example of some of the stuff that we're talking about. Did you know Alistair McGowan has a sort of third act underway as a pianist? I think he'd always played a little bit, or he learnt as a child, but he got really, really, really stuck in during lockdown, and now hits the road as a pianist as much as he hits the road as a comedian and impressionist, which is probably what you know him best for. Anyway, he's a great guest on Full Disclosure this week. Quite often when we talk about the childhoods of people who've gone on to make careers in the creative arts, you realise the role that the state education system played, and we'll return to that conversation shortly. I like this from Mike. You just described me, James. I'm 6'1", 17 stone, with a shaved head, a big beard and lots of tattoos. At my state school on a council estate, I was introduced to drama by my English teacher. After much nagging and badgering, I agreed to be in the school play. That was in 1992. Since then, I've performed all over the country, including the Minack Theatre in Cornwall and the Edinburgh Fringe. I've been privileged to star in plays by Shakespeare, Gogol, Ayckbourn and so many others. And I even received an acting award from Sir Michael Caine. Add to this the many musicals I've done, and you will see how rich my life became. Before that intervention by my teacher, who is still a dear friend to this day, I was heading down a very different path. I dread to think where I would have ended up, but it would have not have been pretty. I owe her everything. So a shout out, please, to Pam Hemmelrich for her wisdom and guidance over the years. Thank you. No, thank you, Mike. That's exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? And I can tell you that Stuart is listening in Romilly, and the Friendship Inn is still serving pints. And indeed I will. If I am ever nearby, I shall let you know, Mike, and we can have a chat over a nice pint of Robinson's. Have a listen to this, because this is the fella, I don't know, I mentioned it to you earlier in the week, Senator Mark Kelly. He's a military veteran, as you'll hear from the clip. This is the man that Elon Musk called a traitor. Here he is responding.
When I was flying in combat over Iraq during the first Gulf War, getting shot at on, almost every time I went up on missions, I didn't expect that there was a 10-year-old kid, sitting in South Africa, who one day was going to become the richest guy in the world and was going to call me a traitor for doing my job. I mean, who saw this coming? It was quite the surprise. I don't take him very seriously. Now he kind of acts like a 12-year-old kid, just hurling around insults. He supposedly has this big job in the Trump administration. He's just doing an incredible amount of damage to our institutions, to our workforce, but to the missions that this government needs to keep people safe, to keep our economy moving forward. He's doing significant damage. So I don't take the guy incredibly seriously, but at the same time, I do worry significantly about the damage he's doing.
I think he's been an astronaut as well, although I may have imagined that. And the reason why Elon Musk called him a traitor was because Senator Kelly was speaking about the importance of continuing to support Ukraine. So, that is your radicalised online right coming up hard against a military veteran with all of the scars and medals to prove it. And speaking of Musk, guess which company has joined the long list of companies in America objecting to the tariffs that the president is determined to introduce, the retaliatory track. Can you guess which company it is that has sent a letter to the US Trade Representative's office? Go on, have a guess. Yeah, that's right, it was Tesla. But guess what else? I could have done a multiple choice, but all my multiple choices are a bit manufactured, a bit confected. Like when I say which of these stories isn't true, then I read you 3 stories that are absolutely shocking about Donald Trump, and they're all true. So is it A, Tesla? Is it B, British Leyland? Or is it C, the East India Company? Yeah, well done, it's Tesla. And no one could sign the letter. So they've sent a letter. The letter has been published. It's been, leaked, published, I don't know which. And no one could sign it. Because obviously, you work for Tesla, you're sending a letter to the president saying, hey, this is really bad for our business. If you sign it, you're going to have your boss on your back, because your boss is also Donald Trump anyway. That's where we are now. 12:39 is the time. Respect for Senator Mark Kelly. Speaking up is becoming increasingly hard to do, as the Democrats seem determined to prove on an almost daily basis. Back to culture, and back to where you'd be without it, and why that persuades you that these creatives, these stars, are right to oppose the untold damage of state school arts cuts. Susan's in Greenwich. That's two calls from Greenwich today. Susan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Susan.
Well, I play the flute, and I've had a career playing the flute for, 50 years or more. I'm now a professor at the Royal College of Music and have been for 40 years, and a professor at Trinity Laban Conservatory of Music as well.
Wow.
And I just wanted to say my story is very similar to the lady who was the opera singer.
Really?
I came from a working class family. I went to state schools. Both my primary school and my secondary school were state schools. And in my primary school, the headmistress was absolutely passionate about the arts. And we had string teachers, woodwind teachers, drama, a wonderful piano teacher who was the head of music there. And one day somebody came into the classroom and said, who would like to play the flute? And I put my hand up.
Did you have any musical experience prior to that? I bet you played the recorder.
I did play the recording, you're right.
London's burning.
Absolutely. That's how you start with the woodwind instrument.
And when did you... Who was the first person to spot that you had a very special talent?
Well, I think it was my flute teacher, but actually my flute teacher was a clarinetist.
Okay.
And he was a wonderful musician, and we actually looked up the fingerings together. And then I tried to get into junior college, which is Junior Royal College.
Yeah.
And my piano playing wasn't quite up to it.
Right.
And then I was taken under the wing of the senior flute teacher at the Royal College, who taught me, and his wife taught me the piano for a year, free of charge, because my parents were not well off.
Yes.
And so I have experienced not only support from my state schools, both of them, but tremendous kindness from teachers all along the way. And I eventually became principal flute of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And the first woman member, as it happens.
Oh, wow.
And I've had quite a diverse career, but I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet or flute or whatever.
Oh, yes, of course. You left that door wide open, didn't you, Susan? I didn't think you could play the trumpet.
No, we don't need to go through that door.
No, I hear you, but on this programme, there's very little room for modesty. But one thing that does intrigue me, and I don't want to lead you into uncomfortable territory, but how many people do you encounter now as a professor with a background similar to yours in sort of socio-economic terms?
Well, that's exactly what I was about to come to.
Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. We're on the same page. I've seen a huge decline in the number of British students who come to the colleges, and I have tried to offer workshops with young students that I have for the local state schools where I live, and when I asked the heads of the departments if they could invite a wind quintet or something to come and play the instruments for their children, they just don't have any money at all to do it.
Right.
And so it's very, very sad. And I think we are at a stage where there are a lot of very, very gifted young musicians out there who will never, ever have the support that they ought to have, or the education in the schools.
And I know I've got my own answers to this question, but what do we lose as a society, do you think, as a consequence of that?
Well, I mean, music enriches lives, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And not only for children who would like to take it up professionally, but it is mentally such a great discipline. And I've noticed with students who study music that they are much more they're grounded and very disciplined, and their schoolwork improves. I have a son who plays the cello, and as soon as he took up the cello, I felt that his schoolwork improved and that his whole, they're happy. It gives you great happiness playing music.
It does, yeah. Well, it's something I could never do, but both my girls can a bit, and I'm actually quite jealous because that space that you inhabit when you're playing music, different spaces when you're doing it in company or whether you're doing it alone, is a space that I think you can only access by being an actual player. You can't do it simply by listening. I mean, the beauty of listening, the places you can go when you're just listening are spectacular and special, but I'd love to be able to play an instrument. 12:45 is the time. Susan, thank you. You never know who's listening. I've said it before and I'll say it. Should we do our second Radiota of the day? Come on. Were you the first woman in the oh, she's gone. Oh, well. No, we'll save it. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Let's do it, Keith, because Susan was the first woman in the RPO, and if you build it, they will come. I mean, crikey, a woman who has become a world authority on playing the flute, who wouldn't even have picked up a flute were it not for music lessons in state schools.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
If you build it.
If you build it.
They will.
They will come.
Oh, rest in peace, Ray. And I'm going to play a little clip of Alistair McGann now. Do the long one, because it touches on some of the stuff that we've talked about. And also, I want you to listen to the whole thing. And the bigger the aperitif, the more likely you are to stick around for the main course. Fascinating, lovely bloke. Some people pop up for full disclosure. And I sit there going, how have we not done this before? I've been doing it for so long now. How can there still be fascinating people out there that we haven't done before? Why have we never got around to this? It was very much like that with Alistair, and it was every bit as interesting as you'd expect. If like me, I mentioned a moment ago, I've never played a musical instrument. I've never done stand-up comedy either. Yeah, really, I know, it's very hard to believe. But he's a student of it. It was fascinating, some of the stuff he says about the craft and the art. Anyway, just have a listen.
One of the biggest bits of advice I had, best bits of advice, was from a man called Kim Kinney. Again, we lost Kim about 5 years ago. And he ran the Comedy Store. And Kim, he was this very kind of sort of hard-bitten Scotsman, but at the same time a heart of gold. And he said to me, what you've done, I did an open spot there. He said, it was very good and they loved it, but I can't book you for 20 minutes yet. You're not ready. I said, right. He said, go away for a year, which sounds like forever when you're 24. Yeah, actually, sounds quite a long time now. He said, go away for a year, do the other clubs, and try and do an act without the voices. I went, what? He said, prove that you can write jokes and then people laugh at them, and then put the voices on top of the jokes and you've got double the laugh.
Wow.
And it was the best bit of advice ever, because I went away and proved it was a tough year that I could get laughs without more or less the voices. But then when you marry the voice with the joke, it makes it funnier. For instance, this is quite a long routine, but it's come to mind. I had this idea about milometers when you're a kid in a car. I think you're younger than me, James, but even so, you'll remember this. When you're on a long car journey, the excitement when the car milometer went round to a big round number. So I did this joke as me. And it gets enough of a laugh, you think that works. But then now I do it and I say, Kevin Bridges, you know the sort of stuff Kevin comes out with. He's quite young, but he's still nearly 40 now. But he comes out with stuff like, kids today don't know they're born, never get to go on a long, boring car journey because they can be on their devices. They can do anything they want on a long car journey to stop it from becoming a long, boring car journey. But when I was a kid, the most exciting thing that happened on a long, boring car journey was when the milometer changed to a big round number. I still remember my dad saying to me, look at that, Kevin, 49,999.9 miles about to change to 50,000 miles, 6 little wheels going round at the same time. Life does not get much better than that, son. And suddenly the routine is 3 times better.
Sure.
Because you believe Kevin Bridges would say it, you'd enjoy the voice, and the material works. So sometimes that kills me because I go, I didn't laugh at it when I did it. But this is what comedy is all about. It's the persona.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work on an impression at the moment of Tom Allen. And when you listen to Tom, you think, look at the things he's doing to make his voice be so interesting so that every single joke will work because he's doing so much with it. So it's always the way you tell the jokes. And Tom is extraordinary in what he does with his voice. I think he went to drama school. But he throws it up and he throws it down and he gets theatrical and he gets angry. But you listen.
Yes. Absolutely.
Now, if he just did that with his ordinary voice, the material's still good, like me, but it's not going to work. But I haven't got that persona, which is why, this may not be your next question, but it can be. Impressionists never work on game shows as guests.
Or panel shows.
Panel shows, that's what I meant. Panel shows. Never work. Because you have to have a construct. You have to kind of say, if so-and-so is in this situation, because you have to say who the voice is, because people don't always get it. And it's not always good enough, but you have to say. And if you do say, and I had this a lot from people when I was starting out, again, I won't mention names, but they know who they are. People would say, oh, it's almost as if so-and-so was in the room. Or I see you had to say who that was, and you kind of go, give me a break.
Yeah.
But you do have to do that. And so it seems like a construct. And people don't know who you are because they know the voices.
I'd never thought of that.
So you're on a panel show and you say something is you, and they'll say, who was that then? And you go, well, that was me. And they go, oh, but you haven't got an attitude.
Recognition. I'd never thought of that before, as I said in the interview. It's true, though, isn't it? It's really, very, anyway, I loved that. Really, really interesting stuff. And as I say, given that music's played quite a big part in today's programme, the sort of second, third act of Alistair's life now involves professional piano playing. He goes on tour, runs a music festival in Ludlow, which is one of my favourite towns in England. It's almost in Wales. Anyway, just on we go with the conversation about why it is important for children to be taught arts and why you even have to have this conversation and whether or not Bridget Phillipson will step up to the plate. 12:53 is the time. Nick's in Tottenham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Nick.
I'll try my best to follow on from Susan's brilliant contribution.
Wasn't she wonderful?
I'm calling from the London. You mentioned the cellist of the London Symphony Orchestra.
Yes.
Which made me want to call. I'm calling from the London Symphony Orchestra's warehouse.
Oh wow!
And to answer the question is that I owe absolutely everything to my primary school swing band, where they put a trumpet in my hand, and that I went to studied at music college. and now I work in the operations team at the London Symphony Orchestra. And I think what's important to highlight is that it's not about putting an instrument in a child's hand and telling them you could be the principal cellist, or in Susan's case, the first female member of the RPO. What an incredible achievement,
isn't it?
That actually there is such a world in this industry, whether it's the trumpet player like myself who I look after the percussion equipment, or the flautist who became the librarian, or the trombonist who became the truck driver. I can tell you that the effort required for something like the London Symphony Orchestra to operate is run by musicians.
Oh, I didn't know that, because you want to be part of it, even if you're not on the stage.
Absolutely. One in 1,000 musicians will become that level of being on the stage for a top orchestra. Yes. But that doesn't change the fact that you're so passionate about the Barbican being filled with the people that appreciate this music and this culture, surviving and continuing.
And that's another great reminder of teamwork and icebergs. The bit above the waterline is only a tiny part of the whole iceberg, isn't it? And you are part of what those people enjoy, the part of the experience that they have in the auditorium, in ways that most people in the auditorium probably don't recognise as readily as they do the people they can see on the stage in front of them.
Yeah, spot on.
I love it.
And to very quickly add, in terms of back to the question of the putting the instruments in children's hands. We had a few weeks ago, we had a school actually came to the warehouse. So they don't have to go to a concert to learn about classical music. And this was, I'd say, 7-8-year-olds, and they learn all about the different families of instruments. They learn what does it take for an orchestra to run, and they got to learn what can you do in the world of music, careers in music. Even at an early age, we focus on that, and the cost of a trumpet, student trumpet, it's about £500, I would say. That's what their budget is for the whole year, for the whole school.
Incredible, isn't it?
Music.
It's incredible. Invisible gains and invisible losses in a way, except some of the gains are so visible when we do phone-ins like this. The losses we'll never be able to fully measure. What we lose as a society by denying children like the one you used to be, that moment when they stuck a trumpet in your hand and somehow everything shifted a little bit on its axis.
Yeah, everything changed, and it's not just career as well. That was the focus of why I called. Of course. But as a trumpet player, I'm from Manchester. I grew up in brass banding.
Yes.
And that is my link to my heritage. My generations behind me. Brass banding continues, and I owe not only just my career to that trumpet being put in my hands, but I owe my social life and my friends and my family.
Yeah, of course.
It's more than that, and it's not just brass banding. Imagine the Notting Hill Carnival, all those fantastic, different genres of world music. They got to try them as kids, and that became their passion.
Do you know, you're what's the word I'm looking for? You're an evangelical. Is that right? An evangelist. An evangelist for this. And in fact, every caller has been. And of course, what we'll never know is whether or not you'd have this sense of advocacy and articulacy if it wasn't for the cultural exposure that you've enjoyed from a very early age. It turns us into people that we wouldn't necessarily have been otherwise. Thank you, Nick. Lovely stuff. Can I squeeze in one more? Zara's in Waltham Forest. Zara, I don't have long. What would you like to say?
I'll be quick. I went to a small comprehensive high school in Cheshire, and I was the only Asian girl in the school. It wasn't a very multicultural community at all, and I was bullied quite a lot.
I'm sorry.
And my art teacher used to leave the art room open, and he used to tell us the art room's open at lunchtime. You can come in, and it was a safe space. And I used to go in, and it was a beautiful, beautiful art room. Big windows all the way across. It was always warm and sunny. Well, that's my memory of it anyway.
Yes.
And there was loads and loads of art books. There was shelves and shelves of art books. And there was 2 or 3 of us, bullied kids, and we'd sit there and we'd look through the books. I'd paint. And he was such a special person, a special man. I'd like to say his name, James Shields.
Wow.
And he's a brilliant art teacher. We're still in touch. And today, I'm an artist because of him.
No.
It's yes.
Oh, how lovely.
I'm a visual artist, and he believed in me. And it was that belief that stays with you as a kid that I can do this. And the thing with art and the creative art, there's no measurement. There's no A's or B's. I don't think you can measure 2 paintings, but it's what it makes you feel. and it's spiritual and emotional, and it's who you are as a person.
Aww.
And that man changed my life, and I love him, and I can't explain how much that meant to me at that time.
Well, I think you just have. You might not realise it, but you've got the nod of the Fogarty, so it means that you have successfully managed to explain.
You can see my work. My work is out now in Bradford City of Culture, 2025. It's in Centenary Square, and you can, if anybody wants to see my work, it's there. But it's all
what's your full name, Zara? Zara Hussain. There we go.
I'm a visual artist.
Well, that's perfect. Well, a lovely end to the conversation. Well, not quite the perfect end to the show, because I've got to issue an apology now. Do you know why? What do you think happened on today's show that I have to apologise for? Did anyone actually notice? Did you notice, Keith? Did you notice? Who noticed? What? Upstairs, was it? Someone? Yeah, well, we're drawing attention to it now. What do you think, She? You've been doing this longer than I have. Shall I apologise for something that nobody's noticed?
Well, someone did, and they count.
Okay. So we didn't realise that in the clip of the audience at the Kennedy Center in Washington booing J.D. Vance, there was some rather ripe language lurking under the boos and the jeers, and at least one person listening picked up on that. So I would obviously, not making light of the actual apology for anybody who was offended, and indeed not offended, it shouldn't have happened. And so I do apologise for that possible foul language in the background of the J.D. Vance clip earlier. Potty mouths. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind. Oh, everyone's going to pause and rewind live radio now, aren't they? Looking for the swearies. As well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com.
Thank you very much, James. Oh,
I didn't say the last bit.
I know, I leapt in.
No, it was my fault because I gave you the cue, really, didn't I? I did it as if I'd finished.
What a pair of pros.
Coming up, that was close. I wondered where you were.
Where that was going.
Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.